November 2004, off the coast of Southern California, the radar operators on the USS Princeton begin to see objects coming essentially from space.
And as I come up, I can see him as he's crossing in front of me. It starts to accelerate, gets right on my nose, and disappears.
This particular object was not following any of our rules. Like, what the is that? Like, we're seeing something for the first time. We don't know if it's a threat. We don't even know what it is.
We don't know what we don't know.
These unidentified flying phenomenon or objects, you know, I don't know what they are. But we've established one thing: they exist.
Our pilots have been seeing these things for decades.
Their sightings go all the way back to the 40s and 50s and 60s.
We have a report of an unidentified aircraft south of the field.
There have been hundreds of sightings in Westchester, Dutchess, and Putnam counties.
Anything that enters an airspace that's not supposed to be there is a threat.
There's a lot of people who feel very passionate about this issue, and they just want people to take it seriously, as they should.
The military and the government basically decided on a policy of shaming.
The witnesses were very afraid of being ridiculed.
They think you're a nut. To tell you the truth, that's just what they figure you are.
We needed to remove the stigma.
Republicans are just as curious as Democrats when it comes to these matters.
It used to be that the burden of proof was on the true believer. They saw something, prove it. Now the burden of proof has shifted to the government. Now they have to prove that they don't come from perhaps another universe beyond ours.
We get reports every night.
I don't know what the hell it is. It looks like a rotating right around it.
Yes, it came from outer space to fill the world with terror, to bring you unforgettable suspense.
When you hear the term UFO, I think a lot of people think of Little Green Men and Elvis on the Mothership and tinfoil hats.
Where did it come from?
When in reality, what we're talking about are real objects that are being encountered over controlled U.S. airspace, in some cases very sensitive locations, performing in ways that, frankly, we can't understand.
Honestly, we have video footage of UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena.
My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. The whole thing, dude.
More and more things that we can't identify. So we need to know what it is. That is necessary for national security.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
Might this be from the Russians, the Chinese government, or another hostile nation, a non-state actor? Or are these aircraft otherworldly? Are these beings from another galaxy or universe? These are questions that have to be answered.
I think the best way to characterize it is we're vulnerable. It's a vulnerability, and that vulnerability could be exploited, could be massively exploited. So that has to be a national security concern.
We've been looking at this topic for the last 70 years as a country. We have substantiated reports of UAP activity from at least World War II.
We have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources.
You're not taught this in history class, but we had a phenomenal series of UFO sightings directly over the nation's capital in July 1952 on 2 successive weekends.
The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States.
The American people wanted answers. And unfortunately, the Air Force chose to obfuscate.
Our critics continually charge that the United States Air Force is withholding information from the general public. This is absolutely untrue. We are not hiding anything. We have nothing to hide.
So in the early 1970s, the government concluded its investigation into UFOs. As a result of that, there was this quiet period. This point where the U.S. government had washed its hands of the topic, and that occurred for several decades, or at least that's what we were led to believe.
But in fact, in 2008, I was approached by a couple representatives from a little small obscure office somewhere in the Pentagon. That office was called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP. The individuals asked me if I would be part of an effort which quite literally looked at UFOs. ATIP was the deliberate and purposeful study of unidentified aerial vehicles that were being encountered in controlled U.S. airspace. People ask me, well, why you, Lou? And as it was explained to me, it was because of my background. I'm a career counterintelligence special agent. Many of my assignments were overseas, initially in the Latin American hemisphere, and then later on, after September 11th, over in Afghanistan and the Middle East. I took an oath many, many years ago to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that's why I accepted the offer to join ATIP. I approached this job the same way I did every other job I ever had in intelligence. The exact same methodologies that we used to hunt terrorists, we were using to hunt UFOs. The sources of information that was collected was primarily through Department of Defense and military assets. Think of fighter aircraft and military eyewitnesses. We did not engage the public. These pilots are not only trained observers, but they are some of the best aircraft pilots on the planet, operating some of the most sophisticated weapon systems on the planet. When they're telling you that they are encountering something that they cannot describe, that impacts our national security and our ability to respond to a perceived threat. And so when they are encountering these objects, we have to take their testimony seriously. Imagine something that had the ability to fly in space, underwater, and in our atmosphere at 13,000 miles an hour and change directions instantly. We fly the SR-71 at 3,200 miles an hour. If you wanted to take a right-hand turn, it would take you roughly half the state of Ohio to do it. And yet what we're seeing are objects that can do 90-degree turns instantly. And we're not talking about speeds of 3,200 miles an hour. They've been clocked at over 13,000. The question arises, how is that possible?
On the Armed Services Committee, the one thing I did become aware of that I was very concerned about is that members of our armed forces have come forward over many years with reports of unidentified aerial phenomena that they actually captured. And instead of that information being well received, it's often been denigrated.
By and large, most of the data was not even filed or saved or reported. The information that was stored did not go to a central authority.
That's not acceptable. And if we don't know what it is, it's not an appropriate response to say, well, then let's not look at it, or let's not admit it's there. And so I wanted to look into this further.
So is that like an adrenaline junkie? Is that what you call yourself?
I would say I'm an adrenaline junkie, but I like fast cars, and flying jets are pretty cool. I mean, I think it's the greatest job on the planet. My name is David Fravor. I'm a retired Navy commander, Super Hornet pilot. I flew for 18 years for the United States Navy.
I'm at the foot of the ladder.
July 1969, I was with my mom watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon.
Both hands down to about the fourth rung up.
And I was fascinated with space, and my mom said they were all former military pilots, and about from that point on, I had this goal that I was going to fly tactical aircraft somewhere in the United States military. I got some pilots that I worry about. Because, you know, the first thing, you don't want to lose anybody, and number two, the airplanes are pretty expensive, and it's tax dollars. In November of 2004, we were going to work with the USS Princeton. Then we were flying, we're training our air crew.
Stand by for word from commanding officer.
As Alex was flying the other plane, the Princeton came up and said, "Hey, sir, we're gonna hold on training today." So they said, "Hey, we have a real-world vector," and they turned us off to the west. It goes to, oh, real world, maybe we're going to intercept some drug runners.
We were flying in a tactical combat spread formation, 2 aircraft. Each aircraft had 2 air crew. As the radar hits on the USS Princeton, scopes start to march towards each other. They get so close that they can't differentiate them, and that's called a merge plot. And a merge plot is when you would expect to merge with this other aircraft. And if you're in a combat situation, that's obviously a very tense moment.
So when you do that, you start looking outside. So we're kind of doing this, looking around to see where it's at, because it's somewhere around you and you don't know. And I look down, I go, what is that? Close your eyes and imagine a long cylindrical white object with rounded ends, roughly 40 feet long, that looked like a giant Tic Tac. It was white, pure white. It had no windows, no wings, no visual signs of propulsion. And this thing was going like this. And I describe it as like if you put a ping pong ball and it was bouncing off a wall.
This particular object was not following any of our rules. It didn't have a turn radius that we would expect. It didn't have a period to accelerate and decelerate. It just seemed to zip so quickly that it was, again, really disorienting, really confusing for us.
David said it was the WTF moment.
Yeah. Oh, there were definitely some WTFs on the radio. Not in a scared way, but like, what the is that? Like we're seeing something for the first time.
You know, some people go, what is that? And they run. And then some people see it, what is that? And they're curious. They want to get closer and closer. I wanted to get closer, see what it was.
My lead, Commander David Fravor, he says I'm in, which means that he's engaging with this thing.
We're going around, we get to about the 12 o'clock position, and this thing's still pointing north-south. The Tic Tac goes and turns and starts coming up. So now it's mirroring me. Whatever it was aware that we were there. And as I come up, I can see him as he's crossing in front of me. It starts to accelerate, gets right on my nose, and disappears. For something to come off the surface of the ocean like it was moving around, to be able to just accelerate to match my speed, and then to rapidly go away, we do not possess that technology.
Dave Fravor was my commanding officer. Dave had his encounter. He comes back and lands on the carrier and goes, I'm a little weirded out. We were out there and we saw this object. I need you to go out to this sector of airspace and try to find it. He's been flying his entire career, over 20 years. When he says something like that, I take it seriously.
Chad decided, if there's any way possible, if I can get this thing on video, I'm going to do it.
I think it's a testament to Chad Underwood and his pilot, their experience, their expertise, their technical acumen, that they were able to launch and find it and bring back FLIR footage.
You can see we just jumped to infrared. Target is now white against a black background. It's the same picture, it's just a different kind of polarity. I told my pilot, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go into every single field of view, zoom, TV, and just try to bring back as much footage. So we pop the tapes in and take a look, and every single eyeball in the room was just like wide open, like, whoa. How do I describe this to someone who's gonna be, you know, skeptical, and there was kind of that stigma of like, all right, you saw an alien. I'm like, I didn't say I saw an alien. All I can tell you is I couldn't describe it.
There's a lot more videos there. What we're seeing on gun camera footage is being validated and verified by eyewitness testimony, which is also being further substantiated by radar data. My intent was to have this information presented to the Secretary of Defense so he could make an informed decision. there are aspects of this phenomenon that definitely belong within the national security arena. Especially if these objects were over controlled U.S. airspace, that's inherent government business. The boss needed to see the data. And unfortunately, that information was not permitted to get to him. On a regular and routine basis, I was brought up to the secretary's suite, and I was briefing his direct reports. But they wouldn't bring it to his attention. And I suspect they were trying to save him from embarrassment, because if someone in the media said, "Were you ever briefed on UFOs?" he'd have to say yes. And so, after several failed attempts to brief the Secretary of Defense, I chose to resign. Sometimes if you want to help the system, you have to leave the very system to do it. And that's what I chose to do. My resignation, it wasn't easy. It was probably most difficult on my family. I had given up a successful career, but it's kind of a code of ethic with us in government that if you can't fix a problem internally, then you leave, which is ultimately what I had to do.
Leslie, interview, take one, Mark.
My name is Leslie Kane, and I'm an investigative journalist, and I've been reporting on UFOs for about 21 years. In the fall of 2017, I got a call from a source of mine, Chris Mellon, a former Undersecretary of Defense who was very interested in UFOs, and he invited me to a secret meeting in Washington, D.C., and I eventually learned that the purpose was for me to meet the former head of an official program within the Department of Defense, which was studying UFOs and had been doing so for 10 years. I met Lou Elizondo the day after he resigned from this secret program. So this was unbelievable to me. There was a program, and I was actually about to meet the person who headed up that program. It was a big deal. It was the biggest moment of my career as a journalist. These are original copies from the original negative of probably the most... When I first started reporting on UFOs in 2000, I was working at a public radio station in Berkeley, California. And suddenly this colleague from France sent me a report in the mail. The report was called the Cometa Report, and I had the only exclusive English translation. What it was a 90-page study of official UFO cases put together by French military officials, generals, an admiral, the chief of police. What really stunned me when I read it was their conclusion. What they said was that the extraterrestrial hypothesis was the most valid, rational, and logical explanation for the UFO cases that they studied. So I thought this was a huge story, and I thought to myself, what if the equivalent level of officials in America said something like that? Wouldn't that be front page news? Wouldn't that go all over the world? And then I pitched a story to the Boston Globe, and in May of 2000, that story came out. The response was huge within the UFO world. But what I was surprised about was that there wasn't more response outside of the people who already cared about this topic. And so my goal in writing about UFOs has been mainly to bring information forward to the public. But beyond that, it's to motivate our government to pay attention.
I commend the media for tackling this, because they're putting a lot at risk as well, reporting on this topic.
Pilots are in a position to provide very useful information to scientists.
That's how we have a comprehensive conversation with the American people.
I did not walk away from that meeting with Lou Elizondo carrying anything with me. I was shown 3 videos of UFOs. And these were official Department of Defense videos that were, without question, unexplained objects.
Did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay.
She ran through the videos, and she asked me, "Are these authentic?" And I said, "I can tell you that the videos are authentic. And the only reason why I'm telling you this is because they're unclassified. I facilitated the review process for them through the Department of Defense."
Two of them had audio tapes of the pilots exclaiming about what they were seeing and their shock and their awe and everything else. This was just absolutely stunning to me because there have been no official videos of UFOs released. I don't think ever, but certainly not since way back in the 50s or 60s. And they were official. That's the thing. They weren't just somebody out with a cell phone taking a video.
It's rotating.
When you hear the pilot's reaction to these encounters, it's very compelling.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh.
They're obviously startled. They're obviously encountering something that they can't explain, and we need to figure out what we collectively are going to do about it. And that's why I resigned from the Department of Defense.
Luis Elizondo's letter of resignation that he wrote for the Secretary of Defense, I think that might have just knocked me out almost more than anything else. He explained why he was resigning this job, and it had to do with his understanding that UFOs were a national security concern. To see that written down and the courage that it took for him to do that, it was just incredible.
In order to understand why I resigned, I think you have to go back to where I came from. I come from, on my father's side, Cuban immigrants. That's meaningful for me because this country offered my family opportunities that nobody else would. And so from a very young age, I've always wanted to serve the country that gave my family so much. You know, ironically, I left the Department of Defense out of loyalty, not disloyalty. I left the Department of Defense to finish the very mission they gave me in the first place.
After reporting all these years on UFOs, there was nothing that came close to the power of that particular meeting. Once I realized this was a big story, I teamed up with my colleague Ralph Blumenthal, who was a freelance reporter for the New York Times, and he pitched it to the head editor. I had never reported for the New York Times before, so I didn't know what would happen. But that's where I felt the story should go. The public has a right to know about what we are learning about this extraordinary phenomenon.
I think it was sometime in the fall of 2017. My boss, the Washington bureau chief, walked up to my desk and said, "Do you want to write about UFOs?" And we both sort of laughed, and she said, Leslie Kean had information about a secret Pentagon program. And that was easily, to me, fascinating. There's no way I don't want to write about it. I'm Helene Cooper. I'm the Pentagon correspondent for the New York Times. I've been with the paper since 2004. You can always tell a Pentagon reporter because we like to say that's the best beat in Washington. You're on aircraft carriers, you're on fighter jets. I've been on bombers, I've been on the B-1 and the B-2. You're on naval destroyers in the South China Sea. You're never bored.
Once Helene Cooper was on board, we set up a meeting with Luis Elizondo, the former head of the Pentagon program.
We met up at a hotel somewhere near Capitol Hill. It started in the afternoon and ended up in the evening.
She made it very clear that she was writing this story. I was a little bit, to be completely forthcoming, a little intimidated. When the New York Times comes knocking, that'll get your attention pretty quickly.
You get stacks of papers and information.
I think they were trying to get me to confirm, you know, who was the sponsor of the program.
He told us that Senator Harry Reid had put money in the Pentagon budget to fund this program. Leslie, Ralph, and I all thought that Harry Reid would deny that he had put the money in there. This was black money. It was kind of off the books. And so all I wanted was to nail the fact that the Pentagon had a UFO, secret UFO program. That's all I needed to do. I'm not trying to prove that they're UFOs. I'm not trying to prove that anybody's visited. I just wanted to interview the people who were involved in this program and put them on the record. Going to interview Senator Reid was a big deal. We needed him to acknowledge that he put the money into the program.
If we didn't have Harry Reid, we might not have a story. He was that important.
We didn't know whether he would be willing to go on the record because this was a very sketchy field to begin with.
You know, most people thought if you're a senior person in the government, it's kind of a career ender to say that the government should actually take seriously the prospect that unidentified aerial phenomena might be, in fact, UFOs.
And so I flew to Las Vegas to meet with Senator Reid. He has this huge suite of offices at the Bellagio. This was gonna be it. This is my one shot. And I walked in to talk to him, and he was completely open.
These unidentified flying phenomenon or objects, you know, I don't know what they are, but we've established one thing: they exist.
In that moment, you're sitting there as a reporter, and your blood is sort of pounding because you're getting the goods. And I was so excited. It's like I'm writing it down, and I can't believe he's telling me this stuff.
My name is Harry Reid. I served in the United States Congress from 1982 to 2017. I was born and raised in Searchlight, Nevada, which is about 55 miles here from Las Vegas. During the time that I grew up there, it was mines were gone, and the number one business was prostitution. So that's the atmosphere I was raised in. I can still remember looking up at the sky, just wondering what it was all about. And I always have remembered that.
Harry Reid really stood out because he was one of the few members of Congress who were willing to talk about this issue. And he had also gotten secret funds to start this program. It was a modest amount, $22 million, which is a drop in the bucket of the Pentagon budget, but it was the first significant amount of money to be dedicated to this issue of UFOs.
Well, it's interesting, you know, my staff, they said in so many words, Senator, don't get involved in this. This is too weird. It's not going to help your career.
Dude, that is so strange.
Didn't tend to be a topic that members of the House or members of the Senate or people in senior positions in the executive branch wanted to embrace.
But I was determined to learn more about this, and so in spite of the admonitions for me to stay the hell away from it, I went ahead and did it.
Well, God bless Senator Reid. He was certainly someone I looked up to and admired. People want their leaders and representatives to be bold. And if you're unwilling to be bold, then why are you in office?
And as I look back over my involvement in this, I think, what if we hadn't done this? Where would we be? Without the work that we did, we would be nowhere. From a scientific standpoint, technological standpoint, security of this nation, these are the reasons we have to continue looking into this.
Well, if there's look at this thing. It's rotating.
At the end of the interview with Senator Reid, I walked out of the Bellagio, and there's a bridge from the Bellagio over the Strip to whatever is on the other side, and it's a pedestrian bridge. And I called Leslie and Ralph, and they were on the phone with Lou, so we're in this four-way phone call, and I was like, he confirmed everything.
Harry Reid had never spoken out before about this program, so this was like the first moment in which he came out on the topic, and that was a big deal.
We were ecstatic because that moment we knew we had it. It's like no matter what happens next, we have the story. The lead up to the actual publication of the story on December 17th was torturous. Our editors were constantly saying, make sure we put skeptics in there, we put people challenging this notion. This caution by our editors was starting to naturally get on our nerves. It's like, run the story already. We've like dotted every possible I we can dot. And we knew at this time that Politico was chasing the story as well. It's Saturday morning, I still haven't posted the story. I think it's 11 or 12, and we're hearing from Lou and from other people that Politico is about to post, and I'm on the phone with the guy who's the Saturday editor going, publish, just publish already. And he's tinkering around with what kind of headline do we want? I was just like, publish, publish. And he finally posted the story. The story is up, and I'm like, thank God it's up. I put my phone in my pocketbook. I go into Costco, and I'm buying, I don't know, what, tenderloin for Christmas. And I'm in there for about an hour, and I come back out, and my phone is like, has blown up.
In a striking expose published over the weekend, the New York Times revealed the existence has confirmed the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program.
People were calling me, and they were like a text, and it was just like the response was huge.
It was a firestorm.
Tens of millions of dollars for the project were pushed through.
It was all over the place.
Unveiled the existence of a real-life X-Files department.
It was all over the world.
Mais selon Luis Elizondo, qui a dirigé le programme confidentiel,
it just went like wildfire. It was a huge deal.
Why do you think it attracted so much attention?
I think one of the main reasons it attracted so much attention was because of those two videos that we included.
They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Oh, big dude.
I mean, there is nothing like watching a video of a UFO for people.
Those videos garnered tremendous views, among the most watched videos the Times had ever put up.
So the response was huge, but that was when I started to realize just how intense the people who care about this are, and just also how equally intense the skeptics are.
I'm content saying that's mysterious. I don't know, maybe it's a glitch in the hardware. And if you're going to say, no, it's not a glitch in the hardware, are you really sure?
For the Navy videos, there are, in fact, explanations that involve nothing more complex than commercial aircraft or balloons or things like that. It doesn't mean they're necessarily alien craft. I think that the assumption that we're being visited fails on the evidence of it, but it's not that it's impossible. It's just, from my point of view, so difficult to go from one star system to another. I think that it's unlikely these are alien craft.
The universe brims with mysteries, and we so want many of those mysteries to be a light in the sky you don't understand. Gee, I want that to be aliens visiting us. But for a skeptical scientist, that would probably be the last explanation.
The skeptics had two major points of focus after our story came out. One of them was on the videos, because they didn't necessarily believe that those videos showed some kind of anomalous object. They thought they could be explained. The second point is the skepticism about these being extraterrestrial craft, which personally, to me, is sort of a disconnect, because we're not saying that they're extraterrestrial, we're just saying we can't explain them.
Now, I don't mind someone being skeptical. I think healthy skepticism is important.
In the same weird sort of way, skeptics are really no different than believers. They're just on the opposite end of the argument. At the end of the day, data is what is going to determine the validity of something.
Well, if humanity wants to understand what is causing this phenomenon, then we need to do real scientific study. And that means we need to collect data, we need to analyze that data, and understand how it might be possible for that phenomenon to fit within the laws of physics.
Now watch the way this thing starts to turn.
But we can't speculate about what it is. We can't just imagine what it is.
You're looking between 20 and 25,000 feet in altitude, and this thing, when it turns sideways, doesn't go down.
We need real, hard data.
This 99.9 and range 99, those are indications that my radar is receiving jamming cues.
It's it's possible that these objects represent a threat to the United States.
It's behaving in strange ways. It has an aura around it.
Then we need to know exactly what they are so that we can respond accordingly. And so I think it's extremely important for us to understand unidentified aerial phenomena.
After the New York Times story was blasted out on the internet on a Saturday, the story ended up on the front page of the Sunday New York Times. And then it was a whole inside page when you opened it up. So it was a long piece. During all the years I had covered UFOs, and I had access to some newspapers, but they weren't at the caliber of the New York Times. And so to see a story on the front page of that newspaper just meant everything to me.
Did you know it was going to be on the front page?
No. No, I did not know it was going to be on the front page. It was, wow. Looking back, it's a little, I haven't thought about that in a long time. It was profound.
Not only have the New York Times rarely covered UFOs at all, and when they had, they were usually kind of ridiculing it.
It's really the fodder more for late-night talk shows than it is for front-page reporting.
Did you go through the secret files, the UFO documents?
I'm not telling you nothing.
When it comes to aliens, there's some things I just can't tell you on air.
But you'll tell us off air? Great.
But the New York Times piece, it kind of opened up that you could treat this seriously.
What it did is it removed a lot of the stigma that was attached to the UFO world. Now, instead of looking at it as a joke, we can start looking at these objects from a scientific standpoint.
We can gather the information, we can gather the data, and then have experts who are qualified analyze it in a systematic way. And so that's why I think it's important to destigmatize the issue.
One reason that article was so compelling and so good is that it was just very factual, based on scientific evidence. And I think that was the beginning of having the American people and probably the world take a look at these areas of unidentified flying objects more intensely than they had before.
So the New York Times article generated a lot of questions among people. Whoa, you know, they're studying these objects and we don't know what they are? Where's all the intelligence data? How come we didn't know anything? And they demonstrate technology that we don't seem to have, and we didn't even know about this?
There's no doubt that there are objects that are seen that behave in ways that are not natural for this planet or for this environment. This is a phenomenon we do not yet understand. There's nothing wrong with us not understanding it. There are many things in the universe that we do not understand, but it asks us to investigate, to learn more, just as we'd want to learn more about any of the stars or galaxies we see in the universe, any of the new creatures we find at the bottom of our oceans here on this planet. We want to learn more about this too.
My hope is that we will use the U.S. intelligence community to solve this mystery once and for all, to find out where are they coming from, who's behind them, what is the agenda. We have the means and the capability to do that if we set our minds to it as a nation.
Unfortunately, the government has been pretty secretive about providing hard data to better understand what this phenomenon might be. So right now, what we still have is a lot of speculation, a lot of what ifs, and no hard information.
The biggest question that remains for me is what else do they have inside the government? What do they actually know about UFOs? And why can't more be released to the public?
And this is a big question because we spent so long obfuscating the truth about this topic that we've somewhat backed ourselves into a corner for over 70 years.
Mr.
Mr. Secretary, there have been charges that the Air Force, for reasons best known to the Air Force, is hiding something in the UFO field. What is that, if anything?
And I do not think this is a conversation like fine wine, where the longer we keep a cork on it, the better it gets. I think this is a conversation more like rotten vegetables in the refrigerator. And the longer we don't address it, the more it's going to start to smell.
There is nothing in Air Force files that come to a conclusion that spaceships have visited the Earth.
I assume that the secrecy is just because that is what they do in the government. There's so many programs going on in that building that they don't talk about. You know, they classify everything. It just adds to the mysteriousness of it.
We should never be afraid of what we don't know. That is an absurd reaction.
The target is 3 degrees to the left of my nose, and it's 5 degrees below my nose.
Not knowing is where you start your inquiry.
So we were operating in and around these waters off the coast.
It doesn't mean it's where you end your inquiry. And that's where I think the U.S. military, if they haven't been doing the work, is mistaken.
Oh my God.
Don't look like no plane. Don't look like no helicopter. What the
UFO sightings burst into the news in 1947.
These sightings have continued ever since.
The Air Force made an effort to clear the air about the phenomenon.
There's nothing to hide at all.
I was stunned that we didn't have the integrity to pursue this.
The U.S. government closed its study of UFOs.
And so the work fell into the hands of civilian groups.
UFO reports not only exist, but persist.
I mean, it's a definite UFO.
The government owes it to this country to investigate sightings of extraordinary objects.
They cover the whole entire sky.
People want to know, is this otherworldly?
This could be one of the biggest events in all of human history.
January the 8th, 2008. It was approximately 6 p.m. in the afternoon, and the sun was just going down. And my buddy Mike Odom called me and says, "You want to come over and enjoy the afternoon? We'll build a campfire up on the hill and just hang out and shoot the breeze." And I said, "Sure can." The second I got out of my pickup, I noticed some lights coming at us at a very high rate of speed. I asked Mike and Lance if they was seeing what I was seeing. They replied back, "Yes, we're seeing it." We saw craft coming from the east going west. Had extremely large lights like a magnesium flare. Almost burnt your eyes to look at it. And it was moving extremely fast, faster than any normal aircraft that we have around here. And as we watched it, we saw that it had 2 F-16 jets in hot pursuit after it, chasing it. And I know what a F-16 is. I go to air shows and pretty familiar with aircraft. It was unbelievable. It left us all in shock. You know, it was out of this world.
Last week, several people in Stephenville, Texas, witnessed what many are calling a UFO.
The Air Force has lied about UFOs for 60 years, actually. And this would be in keeping with that.
In the late 40s and early 50s, there was so many sightings across the United States. It was in the middle of the Cold War, so government officials were trying to figure out what these objects were.
The government examined over 12,000 UFO sightings. Many of those bore a striking resemblance to what we're seeing today.
There have been a certain percentage of reports by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
The Air Force, I think, for a time, may have been making an honest effort to clear the air about the phenomenon. Unfortunately, it didn't last too long.
To this time, there is no valid scientific proof that we have been visited by spaceships.
They were inundated by these reports and just wanted to be done with the whole thing.
We are not hiding anything. We have nothing to hide.
This became the launch of taboo on a more official level. Ridicule became sanctioned.
I would like to have answers, but I'm not sure if we'll ever get any.
We get reports every night.
I don't know what the hell it is. It looks like a rotating light around it. I'd like to report a UFO.
In 2017, two colleagues and I published a story in the New York Times about a secret Pentagon program studying UFOs. The story was on the front page of the New York Times, and it was huge. It was covered everywhere, all over the world. It was like such a sea change for me as a journalist, and also for the issue of UFOs in general. For most people, this was the first time they heard anything about any official relationship between the government and UFOs. But actually, in the late 1940s, the government was really starting to wake up to what this issue was really all about.
It's extremely important to understand that the Cold War affected both the perception of UFOs and how it was handled by the military.
It's hard for us today to remember what the mindset was, but it was dire. It was life and death between the United States and Soviet Union. There was people out with binoculars all over the country, constantly searching the skies for a Russian strike.
It was only natural that during the Cold War, UFOs sort of got folded into this overriding fear of what might attack us at any given time.
Air Defense, go ahead. Bravo Hotel 35 Black West. Check, thank you.
And then, in 1947, just when these Cold War fears were starting to take hold, there was a very famous sighting by a pilot named Kenneth Arnold. That was the sighting that marked the beginning of the modern era of UFOs.
It all began with an incident which occurred in 1947. On the afternoon of June 24th of that year, Kenneth Arnold made the first report on flying saucers.
Kenneth Arnold was a private pilot searching for a military plane that had crashed sometime earlier. And he sees, off in the distance, a chain of 9 silvery objects. He said they look sort of like silver pie plates with a crescent cut out of them. And he times them at going over 1,000 miles an hour.
Nothing in 1947 was capable of traveling 1,200 miles an hour, nor did we have any aircraft that looked like this.
They seem to flip and flash in the sun, just like a mirror, kind of weaving and going at a terrific speed.
He landed at his next stop at the next airport and told the flight crew what he had encountered, and people pretty much just laughed him off. But when he got to his next stop, there were reporters waiting for him. He described their movement as a saucer skipping across the water, and that reporter thought, flying saucers, that's what we'll call them. And that's what we've been using ever since. In the aftermath of Kenneth Arnold's report, there were hundreds and hundreds of reports pouring into the Air Force every day. And the Air Force couldn't just ignore that.
It was in the middle of Cold War, so government officials were trying to figure out what these objects were.
General Twining saw this phenomenon as a possible threat to our country. So he issued a very famous memo in which he said, the phenomenon reported is something real, not visionary or fictitious. Those were pretty big words coming from a general in the Air Force in the summer of 1947.
The Twining memo marked the beginning of an era in which the Air Force would become deeply involved with the question of UFOs. The government was put in a position where it had to decide, was it going to engage with this phenomenon? And if so, how much of it was it going to make public? That continued on in the decades that followed, and it impacted all the cases that came decades later.
The Stephenville, Texas UFO case is very intriguing to me. In 2008, a large unidentified flying object was observed by a large number of people from the ground.
When we first saw it, it had 7 lights across the back of it, all blinking in no particular order. As it approached Stephenville, these 7 lights became an arch shape of 7 lights. And then a brief moment later, they burst into a flame, and it looked to me like the flame was contained in a rectangle box. Somebody had made the comment, well, is it half the size of a Walmart? I said, it's much bigger than the normal Walmart.
What made the Stephenville case so interesting was that in a 4-hour period of time, you had dozens of reports of an object. And they all described seeing the same thing.
It happened about 12 and a half, 13 years ago. I still think about it quite often. We're still trying to find out and discover what the cause of it was. It just had 2 large, bright, intense red lights with a white light in the center of it. And it had 2 military jets behind it, which everybody saw in town, the jets. They was running full throttle, but they wasn't able to catch it.
There were fighter jets chasing those lights, and the jets couldn't keep up with them. And then it just left. It was gone that fast.
What do you think it was?
I don't know what it was, but I know it wasn't an airplane.
After that, I spoke to probably 200 or 300 people that witnessed it. Business owners, city councilmen, policemen, but no one could say what we saw that night. I called the Stephenville Empire Tribune to see if anybody may have got a visual on it. The editor directed me to a newspaper reporter named Angela Joyner. She interviewed me over the phone, and she started digging deep to help find out what we were seeing. She was hell-bent to find out the truth.
My name is Sarah Vandenberg, and I was the managing editor of the Stephenville Empire Tribune for 14 years. In 2008, Steve Allen and a couple of his friends saw some suspicious lights, and they called into the newsroom and talked to Angela Joyner. Angela Joyner was one of my reporters at the Empire Tribune. Sadly, Angela passed away with COVID last year. Angela was a super fun person, but she took her job seriously. Good writer, she was thorough, she was a good reporter.
Steve Allen called me and said, hey, I got a story for you. And I could tell by talking to him, you know, the way his voice changed and his inflections changed, and he was just so sincere when he was describing it to me. I knew this guy saw something. He really saw something big.
After Steve Allen called, she pitched the story to me and said, here's what's happened, what do you think?
Did you have any concern at that point about reporting on this?
Yeah, it just seems like, you know, it's the thought of the little green men coming out of the spaceship. It was sort of tabloidish to me. That was my concern. As a journalist who wanted to be taken seriously, I was afraid that, you know, this would somehow taint my reputation. So I said, put something together and pitch it to me tomorrow evening when I get back to the office, and then we'll talk about it.
This sighting was like right here in our core readership area, and I thought, you know, the readers are gonna like this. They're gonna really like this, so. And the people, they know the people in the story. That's another thing. So that was another reason I went ahead and did it. And the editor left early. You have to cut that part. But she did.
Next morning, at the end of my driveway was the paper. I picked it up, and across the top had UFO sightings in Erath County in like 72-point font. It was just huge. After I had left for the day, the publisher and Angela redid the front page and went to press, and I had no idea. I almost had a nervous breakdown right then. I could not believe that that had happened overnight. 2 hours into my day, I got a call from the publisher. She said, things are blowing up. We've sold out of all the papers we've had. That was my first indication, like, wow, people are really interested in this.
You need to get a helmet, ma'am. Helmet. You need to get a helmet.
It generated a lot of excitement here. A lot of businesses had T-shirts made and sold those, and the high school kids had fun with it.
Stephenville may be typical, but what's happening in the skies above it is a whole nother story.
It kind of is the talk of the town right now.
Angela Joyner is a reporter with the town's newspaper. She's now on the strangest and possibly the biggest story of her life.
It went from this little story to this huge, out of control, worldwide frenzy.
I started getting phone calls from all over the world, Brazil, Japan, England, and next thing you know, CNN and quite a few other TV things showed up and wanted our story.
What's notable about the Stephenville case and other cases that are similar to that is that despite the numbers of witnesses seeing these gigantic craft, nobody in positions of authority came to investigate. That's in contrast to what was going on in the 40s and 50s, where there was an Air Force program and they would investigate cases.
Here is a picture that was released just today. It shows 4 luminous objects in formation in the sky over Salem, Massachusetts. Now, here on this map are pinpointed locations where some 30 saucers have been sighted and are still unexplained.
In 1949, the military started looking into all these stacks of UFO reports that the Air Force was receiving.
Headquarters, United States Air Forces, issued a directive for a detailed study of flying disc reports.
The program was initially called Project Sign, then became Project Grudge, and then it was named Project Blue Book.
Project Blue Book was operated out of the dingiest office at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They had a malfunctioning coffee pot, they had a couple desks, they had a big map up on the wall, and that was it. But they just had a system down.
Project Blue Book started as a good faith effort by the government to collect reports and investigate UFOs. When there were big cases, they would sometimes dispatch someone to interview the witnesses.
The Air Force was pretty open about Project Blue Book.
Major Quintanilla, what are the objectives of Project Blue Book?
First of all, to try to determine if the UFO phenomena presents a threat to the security of the United States. And second, to determine if the UFO phenomena exhibits any technological advances.
Alongside the military employees, the Air Force felt that they needed a credible scientific opinion to support their research.
Is it in the realm of possibility that there are spaceships someplace in this universe?
Well, if you put it in the word, use the word possibility and not probability, then I would have to say, I think as any scientist would have to say, it is certainly possible, yes.
J. Allen Hynek was a mild-mannered college professor from Ohio State University. His job was to go through all these stacks of UFO reports that the Air Force was receiving and try to find out what's going on.
Project Blue Book examined over 12,000 UFO sightings. Many of them bore a striking resemblance to what we're seeing today. Craft with a similar shape, sometimes the same color, hovering, then shooting off instantaneously at hypersonic speeds. Multiple cases like that.
While working for Project Blue Book, Hynek noticed that he was able to explain 80% of cases, but he also noticed that there was about a 20% residue of cases that he hadn't been able to explain away.
Allen Hynek came into the UFO project with the attitude, which is there's nothing to UFOs, but he was a good enough scientist to say, wait a minute, I'm seeing reports here that are not easily explainable.
The Air Force and their UFO study project may have been making an honest effort to clear the air about the phenomenon. Unfortunately, it didn't last too long, simply because they were just overwhelmed with reports.
I looked out the window and there was this bright cigar-shaped object.
It approached us, and it turned a blue-green, brilliant light.
Balls were ahead of us, and all of a sudden they zapped away from us.
This is the Kremlin. Russia today is regarded as a grave threat to our nation, to our freedom, to the peace of the world.
In the 40s and 50s, tensions with Russia were building.
The Cold War was so intense at that point, so there was a genuine concern that the UFO phenomenon could be exploited.
The U.S. government felt adversaries could hoax UFO sightings and then clog up our reporting channels and then have a surprise attack. So the idea was that the UFO problem was not a security problem as such, meaning aliens aren't going to land and attack us. What the UFO problem was, it was a sociological problem. And it was one that demanded a different approach.
The CIA entered the picture by convening a panel of top scientists to examine the UFO phenomena. The thinking was that the enemy could exploit UFOs as a decoy in the preparation for an attack on the United States. 5 outstanding scientists and various Air Force and CIA representatives were to meet. Among the panel members was J. Allen Hynek.
In 1953, the Central Intelligence Agency formed a scientific panel led by a highly regarded scientist named Robertson to examine this phenomenon and its implications.
The Robertson panel was a group of hand-picked scientists who came together to try to determine a way to damp down public interest in UFOs.
Dr. Hynek was actually brought in to be a consulting witness to the Robertson panel.
The panel members were seated around this table. It was a rather somber and impressive occasion, actually.
The mission given by the Robertson panel was essentially to make people stop filing UFO reports.
They proposed 2 methods to damp down public enthusiasm. One was through debunking. The second one was through education, teaching people to explain UFOs in other ways than something extraordinary. It was an extremely important moment in the evolution of how government was going to engage with this topic. This became the launch of taboo on a more official level where it was becoming policy in a way. Ridicule became sanction. The Robertson panel conclusions seemed to have a big impact on Project Blue Book. The project began to dismiss as many cases as possible and provide sometimes ridiculous explanations for them, just have an answer and make them go away.
Hynek's job became going through all these UFO reports and explain them away as natural occurrences. Comet, meteor, shooting star, sundog, eclipse.
I would say the great majority are balloons, meteors, satellites, aircraft seen with the sun glinting off of them, generally quite usual things seen under unusual circumstances or surprising circumstances.
Dr. Hynek did his job very thoroughly. Allen was a fellow trying to please the Air Force in what they wanted.
Hynek would have a bunch of reports dropped on his desk, and he would explain them all away. If a report said probable airliner, they would cross out probable and just say airliner. That's what the witness saw. It was kind of an insult to the intelligence of the American people. Hynek had taken the job for the extra money. Struggling young professional with a growing family, of course he's not going to turn down work.
But behind the scenes, Hynek gradually realized that this was a scientific problem, but he wouldn't go out and state it publicly. He didn't want to do that because it would have been what the Air Force didn't want him to do.
Even though it took place in 1953, the Robertson panel was so potent in terms of its desire to clamp down, to ridicule, to debunk, and to, quotes, educate people to interpret UFOs in other ways, its legacy carried on through the decades, and it impacted cases like Stephenville and other cases of the time.
All right, stand by.
Last week, several people in Stephenville, Texas, a small rural town of about 15,000, witnessed what many are calling a UFO. In Selden, Texas, is Steve Allen. Also there is Angela Joyner, staff writer for the Empire Tribune, the local newspaper in Stephenville. Angela, what are some witnesses telling you?
The thing that I hear over and over and over is how bright the lights were. So I think there's been a lot of consistency in the spottings.
It was Angela that started digging deep. She was hell-bent on trying to find out what we saw and what happened, and it almost consumed her.
The incredible thing about the Stephenville sightings was that witnesses reported seeing F-16 fighters pursuing this object.
I heard this really, really loud noise, and I ran out the front door, and there were fighter jets chasing those lights.
Angela wanted to know what the Air Force knew about the two F-16s and what we saw. So she got in touch with the Naval Air Station in Fort Worth and talked to a Major Carl Lewis. And Major Carl Lewis said, we didn't have any aircraft in your area at that time. I feel like we wasn't given the truth in the military. It didn't seem like they was interested in any questions. Then on about the 10th day, the military issued a press release.
Now, in a plot line that's out of the X-Files, Air Force officials are saying they concede they had F-16s over Stephenville, Texas on the evening of January 8th. Major Carl Lewis says there was an internal communications mistake.
Well, there was an error that was initially reported, sir, and we went and corrected that error as quickly as possible.
The plot thickened, but the Air Force wouldn't say why. They did, in fact, have F-16s in the area.
Angela Joyner says that the Air Force's admission that it did indeed have fighter jets, as reported by the witnesses, bolsters their story all around.
Military coming out with this at this point just is going to fuel the fire for, okay, there is something going on, now what is it?
We thought their attempt to try to explain it away was terribly strange. We had more questions than answers.
UFO reports, hoax or serious sightings, wind up here at Wright-Patterson Airfield in Dayton, Ohio. The Air Force Investigative Unit is known as Project Blue Book.
In the wake of the Robertson panel, Project Blue Book was investigating these civilian reports as a way to tamp down public concern. For example, in Michigan, there were at one point a large number of sightings by people in a community there, and Walter Cronkite, the arbiter of truth for many Americans, covered the story.
The great flying saucer mystery of 1966 began here, near Dexter, Michigan, late in March.
As I turned around to come back on the porch, I looked to the north of me and looked like a fallen star. It was red and kind of coming down. And
Frank Manner's UFO remained over his swamp more than 4 hours. 40 miles away, another swampland and another UFO sighting.
I believe I saw it, but I can't fathom it because it seems so unreal.
This was a huge national story. Everyone was demanding that Blue Book solve the case. And so they called in Hynek, his Air Force Project Blue Book boss, said, get out there and put a lid on this.
The Air Force sent its chief scientific consultant on UFOs, Professor J. Allen Hynek, to check the Michigan sightings.
The illusion of motion frequently is given by the fact that a little bit of swamp light appears here, it goes out, another one appears over here, that goes out then, but the illusion as viewed from a distance is that the objects have moved back and forth. And sometimes this gas will gather into a ball and actually float away.
Allen made an ill-fated remark about, well, some of these sightings could be caused by swamp gas. And the witnesses were upset, to say the least.
The people of Michigan thought that Hynek was making fun of them, that he thought they were all loonies and kooks, and the whole thing blew up in Hynek's face.
they think you're a nut. Tell you the truth, that's just what they figure you are. And I'm not going to take it no more. I don't want nobody down in here. I just leave me alone.
When Hynek came up with the swamp gas explanation, we don't really know whether he believed that or not. But we do know that he was working for the Air Force, and they were committed at that point to discrediting sightings like this one. It was a real turning point for the beginning of people really just having had enough of these kinds of bogus explanations for these events. Following the swamp gas incident, the public was outraged, and even members of Congress became involved.
We've had several incidents in Michigan that many reliable citizens felt were sufficient to justify some action by our government, and not the kind of flippant answer that was given by the Air Force where they passed it off as swamp gas.
Gerald Ford, who was a congressman at the time in Michigan, decided that his constituents were not being taken seriously.
Gerald Ford listened to his constituents and decided that he should call for congressional hearings.
I think the American people would be more assured that there were or were not if such a public hearing was held.
On April 5th, 1966, Harold Brown, the Secretary of the Air Force, and J. Allen Hynek walked into the Capitol building to answer questions about Blue Book's investigation into UFOs.
We have not been hiding anything. The investigations have been made public. The explanations of those where there is a clear explanation have been made public.
They brought in the Secretary of the Air Force, and he just stonewalled. And then it came to be Hynek's turn to talk. He made his own statement that he hadn't shared with anyone, and he said, look, we need to sponsor a scientific study and tell us whether this is something we need to keep studying.
How many really mysterious incidents are there that you'd like to go back and look at again?
Well, as I mentioned in the hearings this morning, I have picked some 20 cases. I think those I would recommend that they be looked at quite closely. Scientist has to keep open-minded on an investigation, a scientific one, without fanfare, a quiet look at the data, I think is in order.
Hynek was initially a skeptic, but as he went through the years, he gradually learned that there really is something to this. Hynek started to believe that we could learn a lot more about the phenomenon through better scientific study. And in fact, that's what happened in Stephenville, Texas.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Hudgens. I'm Senior Field Investigator for MUFON. We're down here to investigate this extraordinary event. We have our Section Director from Waco, Dave Keel, and Director of Research, Robert Powell.
My name is Robert Powell. My educational background is in chemistry, and I work in the semiconductor industry as an engineering manager. Early January of 2008, I'm the Director of Research at MUFON. The term MUFON stands for Mutual UFO Network. I went up to Stephenville with multiple investigators, and we began to interview the witnesses.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I met several key people such as Angela Joyner, Steve Allen, and Leroy Gayton. And Leroy just gave me the best description of what happened that day to him.
As I walk out to my car, I saw 10 to 12 bright fluorescent orbs. They're moving really quickly and then they stop, and then all of a sudden they shoot off. But what was surprising is I'm still looking, probably 20, 30 seconds, I hear two jets.
After interviewing Leroy, the first thing I decided that I could do was get radar data. Freedom of information requests to the FAA. And I got that data back after about 6 to 8 weeks. And it was incredible.
Good morning. My name is Robert Powell. I'm the Director of Research with the MUFON organization. We obtained radar data from the Federal Aviation Administration in the Stephenville area. I talk about this a little bit on the screen here.
One of the first things I do when I get the radar data is I find the F-16s and I match that, yes, that matches the time they went by Leroy's home. Then I look on the radar data for unknowns. And I find 2 miles south of his home, just like he told me, objects on radar that are basically stationary, just like he said. And then the really interesting part was on radar, these objects that were over his home, the next radar blip, the object is to the northeast towards Stephenville, and it had traveled at a minimum speed of 1,900 miles per hour. Now, and that is from stationary. There's no way for me to know what it was. The only thing I can say is what it was not. It was not any type of aircraft, because no aircraft can hover and then move to a speed of over 1,900 miles an hour at low altitude and then stop and hover again. It's just not something we have the ability to do.
There are so many UFO sightings, and the vast majority of them can be explained. But then there are those that involve mass sightings of something really unusual, and in those cases, people deserve an investigation by the officials.
In the aftermath of the swamp gas case, the government decided to fund a college research program of the UFO phenomenon.
At the time, the Air Force was trying to find a way to get out from under the burden of having to investigate UFOs and comment on this. And so a scientific panel was established to investigate and assess the issue. It was led by a Dr. Robert Condon.
The Air Force has turned to the University of Colorado to investigate unidentified flying objects. And they've asked Dr. Edward U. Condon to head the project. How do you propose to go about studying this particular phenomenon?
We'll pick certain selected cases that seem especially interesting and go out and try to learn more about them in those few in greater depth.
The guy who was leading it, Professor Edward Condon, had no interest in the subject and had to be talked into it. So you have a professor who was not looking to do a project, that was given the project, and things didn't go well.
They reviewed 59 cases and wrote them up in a study that was close to 1,000 pages. One of the events they covered was the McMinnville incident in 1950, where the farmer and his wife took a photograph of a disc-shaped object that came over their farm.
The McMinnville photograph, taken by a poor rural couple in a remote area who didn't seek any press, and it showed a UFO very clearly in black and white, maybe 200, 300 yards away.
Here's what the Condon report said about the McMinnville sighting. This is one of the few UFO reports in which all factors investigated, geometric, psychological, and physical, appear to be consistent with the assertion that an extraordinary flying object flew within sight of two witnesses. And there were other cases they described in similar ways.
When the final report came out, the main body of the report was open to the possibility that UFOs might be real. But the final summary of the report was written by Dr. Condon himself. Dr. Condon said it's time for the government to just wash its hands of this whole thing. That's about the only thing most people read.
The Condon report concluded in 1969 this was not a threat to national security, there was no indication of extraterrestrial connection, and there was likely no benefit scientifically from continuing to study this phenomenon. Dr. Robert Condon was somebody that was strenuously opposed to the idea that UFOs could be alien craft of any kind. So from the outset, he had his mind made up. Word is that Dr. Condon himself didn't even bother to read the report or review the data. He just wrote his conclusion because that's what the Air Force wanted to hear.
Condon was definitely the nail in the coffin for Project Blue Book. The Air Force had been involved with looking into UFOs for more than 15 years. They were inundated by these reports, frustrated, and just wanted to be done with the whole thing.
The result was the Air Force said, well, we don't need to follow this anymore. So they used that as a rationale to close down Project Blue Book. Shortly thereafter, Dr. Alan Hynek renounced the whole process and the way the Air Force handled it.
Some of us who followed this whole phenomena became interested in the Condon report. What's your feeling about that?
Well, my feeling is that the Condon report was a travesty on science.
You don't feel they presented a fair picture?
The Condon committee was unable to explain 1/4 of the cases that were submitted that they studied.
Our guest tonight is one of the world's foremost authorities on unidentified flying objects, Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
When Project Blue Book is shut down in 1970, it freed Hynek to say and do whatever he wanted where UFOs were concerned. Dr. Hynek worked nearly 2 decades on Project Blue Book, and during that time, in the data that Project Blue Book had collected. The cases were still breaking down in that very same 80-20 ratio. He was able to explain 80% of them away. He was not able to explain 20% of them. And now he started to worry about that. He was a scientist and he saw a trend, and he thought that might mean something.
If these things didn't fit patterns, then there's no way of studying it. But when you get reports from Australia, Japan, France, then you have to say, well, either there's a virus going around that's causing everybody to become crazy at the same time, yes, or there's something to it.
Hynek was finally free to start investigating what UFOs are in any way he wanted.
So glad you're doing what you're doing. Because there aren't that many reporters that take this seriously.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're doing it.
I've gotten tons of people, you know, they walk up to me and say, thank you for reporting it as straight news. And then I think it was their news judgment, the publisher and the editor, that, okay, we don't want any more of this, let's get back to normal.
Some people said you were fired, some people said, well, you kind of wanted to leave anyway. So what was the
I had
actual
given
story?
my notice. I was asked not to cover anything else on UFOs. I came in, my computer was gone, my Rolodex was gone, and called to the publisher's office, and it wasn't a pleasant scene, and they asked me to pack and go, so I did.
Thanks for talking with me.
Sadly, when Angela left, we never spoke again. I hate that that story really divided us, but it did. She just could not get back to doing her regular reporting. It took over her life.
I thought, you know, the readers are going to like this. They're going to really like this. So that was another reason I went ahead and did it. And the editor left early. You have to cut that part. She did.
I have never seen this. That's hilarious. You know, it's funny to see that. Sorry, I haven't seen Angela in a long time. And she loved that story. And, you know, I look back on that time and I think I was so wrong. And I thought I was so smart. And I was so wrong because they had the foresight to see something that I couldn't. And people did love that story. It was fun for them. I've never spoken about this, but about a year after this story died down, I was driving my daughter to gymnastics, and one evening, it was dusk, and I saw the exact same thing that everyone else had been talking about the year prior. A big thing with the lights, the clear lights that kind of were all over the place. They went straight line, and it took off. And I get goosebumps now, even just remembering it. Oh my God, that's what we've been writing about for a year, and I was the biggest skeptic of all, and here I am. It was a strange moment, for sure. The next day I got to the office, never planned to say a word to anybody. And we had about a dozen calls that day from others who said, oh my gosh, I think I saw that again. That's when I sort of went, okay, there really was something to this, but it took me that long. The government should be looking at this, of course. I have to believe that what happened in Stephenville and Erath County was big enough that it got the attention of the government. I just believe that, and I believe they know a heck of a lot more than we do.
Please welcome, from the Center of UFO Studies in Evanston, Illinois, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Dr. Hynek.
In the years that followed, J. Allen Hynek became a hero, advocating for the study of UFOs.
Dr. Hynek realized that this was a serious problem.
These things are coming over our bases, over our nuclear facilities.
I thought we were under attack. By who or what, I had no idea.
One of these three men is an expert on unidentified flying objects. What is your name, please?
My name is J. Allen Hynek. My name is J. Allen Hynek.
My name is J. Allen Hynek.
J. Allen Hynek came into the UFO field with the typical scientific attitude, which is they shouldn't be studied, there's nothing to them.
Ultimately, that changed, and that's sort of the core of the J. Allen Hynek story.
I, J. Allen Hynek, am a consultant to the United States Air Force on unidentified flying objects.
Like so many other key figures of that era, Hynek had to push against the government that he once worked for and stand up for the truth.
I am also professor of astronomy and director of a large university observatory.
Hynek believed that science was the tool. Science could get us to an understanding of what UFOs are, and that's what he advocated for.
There are a lot of people who don't always understand his rationale for the things he did or the things he said, but Hynek's impact today, I think, is immeasurable.
Only one of these men is the real J. Allen Hynek. The other two are imposters and will try to fool this panel. On to tell the truth.
We get reports every night.
I don't know what the hell it is. It looks like a rotating light around it. I'd like to report a UFO.
The U.S. government closed its formal study of UFOs, Project Blue Book, in late 1969. And the government as a whole says we're not interested in UFO reports.
The Air Force made the decision, let's get out of this business of investigating UFOs. Our business is national security. We've seen no threat. Let's stop Project Blue Book.
J. Allen Hynek, who was the scientist who worked for Project Blue Book for almost 20 years, actually came through that with the opposite perspective, which was that UFOs were something serious and they should be investigated.
In my association with Project Blue Book, I know very well that it was not a scientific project. I also know that they never would notify the media when an interesting case came up. They did everything they could to keep it down. So they definitely withheld information.
Dr. Hynek realized that this was a serious problem. UFO reports could not all be explained, and that the military should be taking this more seriously.
We now know that there were UFO cases during this time period that did seem to have national security implications.
I know that when I was a part of Blue Book, there were a number of cases that never got into Blue Book.
There are witnesses. This was observed at a missile base. This was observed by an Air Force pilot. You mean to tell me that the CIA or the FBI and the government hasn't investigated this?
I think the public would be shocked to realize that there were incidents going back even into the 60s where our nuclear missile silos were being interfered with.
Production facilities, weapons facilities. We've had incidents over numerous ICBM bases.
During the Cold War, intercontinental ballistic missiles, called ICBMs, were strategically located throughout northern parts of the United States, where they were within striking distance of the Soviet Union. There were almost identical UFO events at 2 of the Minuteman ICBM locations. At Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota in 1966, and at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana in 1967.
My name is Robert Salas. In 1967, I was a lieutenant in the Air Force, stationed in Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana.
My name is David Shinley. I'm a retired Air Force captain at Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. In 1966, my responsibility was to launch our 10 nuclear-tipped missiles upon appropriate and verified order.
My name is Robert Jameson. I was a first lieutenant in the United States Air Force, Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. One of my jobs was to, if a missile goes off alert for any reason, is to go out and restart it.
The Air Force includes missile men. Here at Malmstrom Air Force Base, a strategic missile wing controls the most modern Minuteman in its underground silo. The Air Force specialists on this job, by continuous readiness to launch their bird, help prevent rather than start a nuclear war.
We had Minuteman I missiles, and that's a 800 kiloton weapon. And just for reference, the weapons that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were 20 kilotons.
That capability is helping to keep the peace. We have a policy of mutually assured destruction. It would be suicide for us or our potential adversaries to launch a nuclear attack unless they could disable that capability in that system. Then they could conceivably decapitate the United States, destroy the Capitol without fear of a retaliatory response, and change the global balance of power.
Our location was 60 feet underground.
We were very well protected.
It was a concrete steel reinforced capsule.
And this capsule was sitting below what we called the launch control facility.
We had 6 security guards topside. They had the responsibility for making sure there was nobody trying to break in.
I traveled to base to attend the pre-departure crew briefing. After the briefing, several missile crews came up to me and said, "Did you hear what happened overnight?"
Sometime in the evening hours, I get up a call from the main guard upstairs. He tells me that there are strange lights flying over the facility. They're looking at reddish-orange, glowing, pulsating light that's hovering just above the front gate.
And he pointed with his arms, and he says it was right out there, hovering, motionless and without sound.
They did think that there was a solid object within the light, sort of oval-shaped. I kind of dismissed it. I even said, "You mean like UFOs?" and kind of laughed at him, and he said, "Well, they're not airplanes, sir." About 5 minutes later, he calls back, and he's screaming into the phone. Now, he's very frightened. He's babbling. He said he's got all the guards out there with their weapons drawn. They wanted orders on what to do. I told him, make sure nothing enters the fenced area. When I hung up the phone, I thought we were under attack. By who or what, I had no idea. And then we get bells and whistles going off at our control panel. And we could see the lights going from green to red all across the board, meaning the missiles were inoperable now.
If the president had given the order to launch the missiles, we could not have launched them.
Losing 10 missiles was a shock. Except for that instance, I never lost more than 1 missile at a time.
Somehow, some way, vehicles were able to maneuver right over those ICBMs and turn them off.
We don't know why they went down, and still don't know. There's no other reason I can think of that would cause the 10 to go off alert within seconds.
We knew it. It wasn't an ordinary man-made machine because we had nothing like that.
After the incident, I was required not to speak to anybody about it.
I attempted to question the security guard, and he said, "Sorry, sir, I've been told to keep quiet." And he was told that, as far as you're concerned, it never happened.
I had to go through a special briefing. This is where they told me, "You're not supposed to say ever again that something happened because nothing happened." Of course, the first thing I did when I got home was, "Hey, hon, guess what happened?"
There was a man from Air Force Office of Special Investigations. All he wanted me to do was to sign this document, stating I would never speak about this again. Once we signed that document, we were released, told to leave, and that was that. I never spoke about any of this until 1994, so it was about 27 years later.
3 years after the Malmstrom incident, in which 10 missiles were shut down, the Air Force released a fact sheet to the public announcing the close of Project Blue Book. And it stated that no UFO reported, investigated, or evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of a threat to our national security, meaning not even one has represented any kind of national security threat.
That was certainly a lie. Let's use the right word. The Air Force knew full well these were UFO-related incidents, and that UFOs were responsible for the shutdown of these missiles.
We found out later in 1979 that, in fact, a secret memo had circulated called the Bollinger Memo, which stated that any national security cases could continue to be reported through channels already in place. And so it was a complete black and white contradiction between what was being said to the public and what was being said behind the scenes.
There's something in our atmosphere that we just don't know what it is. These things seem to be interested in our nuclear capabilities, and that's something that we should be concerned about.
I kept the secret for 40 years. It was a long time to have this burden on the back of my shoulders. I'm normally quiet personality, and I just don't want to be in the limelight. But the public needs to know this.
Robert Salas did not speak out about what happened for many, many years, and it shows how intimidated these people are to come forward. Decades will go by and they won't even talk about it.
Good morning. My name is David Schindley. In 2001, I found an article describing Robert Salas's incident. And when I saw that, I said, oh my God. The incident that he had was almost identical to the one I had. And I experienced just a joyful freedom. And I finally was able to tell my wife my secret. And so, thanks, Robert, for helping me out.
After the incident, the guards had called me and literally begged me to come out and see them, because this was very traumatic experience for the guards. But I just signed a non-disclosure statement, so I had to tell them on the phone that I could not see them. So when I talk about this, I do it partly for those airmen that begged me to come see them, and I just couldn't do it.
There is a shyness and a reluctance on the part of many witnesses, and understandably so, against reporting, because too many have been ridiculed and life has been made somewhat miserable for them.
Dr. Hynek grew increasingly disillusioned by the Air Force's dismissive approach to these sightings and dismissive approach to the evidence.
Hynek gradually realized that this was a subject that demanded serious study.
Back when Hynek was in Project Blue Book, there was a case. It involved a father and his two sons in Idaho. One day they all saw this object just zoom down this gully, down the riverbed, and disappear. They all three saw it. Hynek found it fairly convincing. He ended up writing it off as something with a natural cause. But that was Hynek's official report to Project Blue Book. Why this is significant is years later, when Hynek started to change his mind, he had regrets about that specific case. He said, with that case, I should have said, you know what? It doesn't add up completely. I think there's more going on here. I'm not going to dismiss it. I'm going to try to find out more. So that was kind of the first chink in Hynek's facade as a debunker.
I began to get certain doubts because it was the people themselves. I said to myself, well, now, come on, how much longer am I going to call these people crazy? And when I changed my glasses, you might say, a little bit, and took a view that maybe these people aren't crazy, and began to realize what sort of people they were, good, solid people, I said to myself, well, the time has come to maybe change my attitude.
With the United States Air Force leaving the role behind of taking in UFO investigations, this left a large vacuum that civilian organizations began to fill.
In 1974, J. Allen Hynek founded the Center for UFO Studies, abbreviated CUFOS. This was a civilian group composed of very qualified people that runs the gamut of the average person with enthusiasm to a very highly trained scientist or academic. And the records that they provided are absolutely crucial.
I'm Mark Rodiger, the scientific director of the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago. Dr. Hynek mentored me and designated me as his successor. Dr. Hynek was the classic professor. He loved teaching. He also really enjoyed jokes, and a good time. He wasn't stuffy. He had a little twinkle in his eye. People really warmed up to him. Alan was very open-minded, and that is really the background to him being interested in UFOs. UFO groups, they're not massive organizations. In fact, we're now sitting in the basement in my UFO office here in my house. The center is really like a scientific think tank. Dr. Hynek realized that there was a need for a focused professional group to study UFOs. That involves mainly three things: being a place for people to report sightings. Number two is to be a place for reliable information. We publish a journal, a periodical with monographs. And finally, of course, a place to do research. We've stayed pretty close to that mission all through the years.
One of the first things that UFOs did was establish a national hotline for UFO reporting. They distributed this hotline to law enforcement agencies around the country and said, put this on your bulletin board. If you ever get a call from someone who has seen a UFO, call us on this hotline and we will do the investigation.
Okay. But it didn't look like anything I know of.
But there was a big difference between civilian and military investigations of UFOs. The military has access to other information civilians don't.
I went to see Don Rumsfeld at the White House, mainly because he's a friend of mine, and said to him, look, I have this Center for UFO Studies, and I wanted you to know that should this subject ever get to the presidential or the congressional level, there is a group of scientists who are ready to work on it. And I said, I do have a certain responsibility to these scientists. Are we spinning our wheels? If this work has already been done by somebody else. I said, because of my responsibility to these scientists, I felt that I had a need to know. And he snapped right back at me and says, you do not have a need to know. Now, you interpret that any darn way you want. In any case, you cannot stop scientists from working. And that's the whole point of being a scientist. They're individualists. They're going to do what they damn please anyway.
In the 70s and 80s, in general, government officials were not talking about UFOs. But some presidents were also interested in getting information about UFOs. When Jimmy Carter was the governor of Georgia, in 1969, he had a sighting with a group of other witnesses.
All of it saw a very bright light in the western sky. And it got closer and closer, and then it seemed to stop in its proximity to us. And then the color of it changed from white to blue to red.
Jimmy Carter was very impressed by that. It really impacted him. Then in 1973, he filed a written report on this with a number of civilian UFO groups, so it's on the record. So when he did become president, he approached NASA to see if they would open up a new investigation that could continue what the Air Force had been doing prior to closing down Project Blue Book. The Air Force would not have wanted this to happen 7 years after closing Project Blue Book. So the Air Force jumped in on the process and said to NASA, we don't want you to do this. After a series of exchanges, NASA did decline the president's request.
Under pressure to answer by the end of the year, NASA concluded that it would be pointless to mount a new research effort because of the lack of physical evidence.
It was kind of stunning that a request from the president would have been denied.
If there is no concrete evidence of people from outer space, how do you write a whole book about UFOs?
Well, that's exactly why I called it the UFO experience instead of something that would have sold more like Sex in the UFO. I called it the UFO experience because that's what I was talking about, the experience that people had. And you can't convince a person who's had a real UFO experience that he hasn't had it.
In the early 70s, J. Allen Hynek came out with his monumental book called The UFO Experience. It wasn't just about research. He was somebody that would listen and took people seriously who had sightings and had experiences. He would go on lots of TV shows and radio interviews, and he was a public figure advocating for official recognition and study of UFOs.
With the space program taking off, there was a groundswell of interest in outer space.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It was a national movement. And so people's imaginations, of course, run wild. Hollywood was able to capture that and feed people's thirst and imagination, and it led to a long-standing, powerful genre.
May the force be with you.
So UFOs became a cultural, creative, imaginative area, and Hynek's book was a big hit.
Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
Steven Spielberg bought the rights to Hynek's book and hired Dr. Hynek as a technical consultant.
And so Spielberg worked with Hynek in helping to get the facts accurate for his movie Close Encounters.
Yeah, I was very influenced by J. Allen Hynek because he was not looking at UFOs as science fiction, but he was looking at them as science speculation. So I met with him and I used him and I picked his brain and he consulted with me.
Dr. Hynek was the fellow that coined the term close encounters.
Well, a close encounter of the first kind is one is close, but nothing really happened.
Close encounter of the second kind includes physical damage to the environment. That could be landing pad imprints in the grass where a UFO was said to have landed.
And the close encounters of the third kind are the most interesting of all. Close encounter of the third kind is really when you meet them.
It was clear that Spielberg wanted real science, real data, accurate information about UFOs, and that's why he called on J. Allen Hynek.
They were drawing from real U.S. government information on how these things operated and maneuvered. Hypersonic velocities or fast speeds, instantaneous acceleration, even biological effects, where Richard Dreyfuss, half his face has a sunburn. Those were all observables that we were seeing in the U.S. government, real observables that made their way onto the Hollywood screen. And that's because Steven Spielberg was provided information from people from Project Blue Book.
Along with Hynek, Spielberg also talked to Jacques Vallée, a French scientist who was well known in the UFO field and had written numerous books on the topic.
I had the privilege of working with Dr. Hynek for 5 years. We built the first computer-based data catalog of UFO sightings, starting with the Air Force files, which covered about 20,000 cases.
Les gens sont venus de partout dans le pays.
These people have come from all over their country.
The French scientist in the movie, character of Lacombe, was based loosely on me. France has an official scientific committee for UFOs that includes physicists, the military, including sociologists and psychologists.
By letting the project team leader be a Frenchman, it immediately gave more of a depth to the understanding of UFOs.
In the whole history of American movies, it's always they come from somewhere, they kill somebody, so we bring the tanks and they destroy all the tanks. That's a very American way of looking at an alien life form.
If everything's ready, you're on the dark side of the moon. Play the 5 tones.
The movie was the first movie in which we were greeting these aliens and they were coming to us as equal, and we were going to have an intelligent discussion with them, or intelligent exchange.
Close Encounters, it just captured the spirit of the mystery of the phenomenon, the scariness of the phenomenon, and kind of the impact that it has on people.
Whatever the government may think about them, unidentified flying objects seem to be popular with the people. Columbia Pictures reports that its film, Close Encounters of a Third Kind, has grossed $39 million in 3 weeks.
I owe a lot to J. Allen Hynek. His instilling in me a professional's point of view on this kind of field reporting. And he helped me make the movie more credible than it would have been without his existence.
Steven Spielberg actually brought him on set for when they filmed the movie's huge climax at the secret UFO base in Wyoming.
Captain, United States Navy, 043431.
Captain. And of course, Close Encounters became a household term because of Steven Spielberg's movie and really catapulted Hynek to a degree of celebrity.
Therefore, will the real Dr. J. Allen Hynek please stand up?
Even though Hynek worked for our government for almost 2 decades, what he was doing in the 70s and 80s seemed to have no impact at all on the government. And sightings continued.
There's the fantastic sightings last year and this year in the Westchester and Putnam County areas. Those are literally out of this world. I can find no logical explanation for them.
I don't know what the hell it is.
We were coming home from grad school, and we were just yakking like we are now, and all of a sudden Doris says, "What are those lights up there?"
I was driving north on 118, and as I was approaching the light here, I looked into the northern sky. I saw what appeared to be a large aircraft with landing lights, flying very low, about 500 feet. And it stopped, and it rotated 180 degrees and started to head west.
I looked up at Interstate 84, and it was a parking lot. People were out of their cars, blinking lights, pointing up at the sky, and there was that city of lights hovering over in my backyard.
And it went like from night to broad daylight.
And all of a sudden, it's going to land, it's going to land.
When I came to the station, the phones were ringing off the hook. The object came directly over my head, less than 500 feet above me. Covered the whole sky. It was totally quiet, no sound whatsoever.
You could hear a pin drop.
And I said, oh, what do I do with my family? How am I going to handle all this?
What I saw was unbelievable, mind-boggling. The whole town saw what I saw.
Beginning in around 1983, there was an incredibly dramatic series of sightings that took place in the Hudson Valley area of New York State and in Connecticut, which was actually a wave because it took place over years. People would report these UFOs to the police or maybe to local UFO groups, and a lot of people were kind of awed and frightened.
It was a little spooky. How come? Because it was unexplainable. What Jim Brooks saw...
There was a lot of local reporting, some local civilian investigation.
Our researchers have set up a special UFO hotline in Westchester.
But it was something that involved hundreds, at least, witnesses, if not more.
There was nothing coming from our government, even though these gigantic craft were cruising around over a part of the United States.
The Federal Aviation Administration has joined the Air Force and many astronomers in attributing most UFO sightings to man-made objects and natural phenomenon.
Believe it or not, the planet Venus is a fairly common UFO sighting.
It moved very slowly.
We looked up in the sky, we saw 6 lights in a V shape.
Even after all these witnesses had seen these objects and had reported them to their local police, it still became a kind of a joke.
The head of my school, he said, you know, some people might think you're crazy.
I was the commissioner of motor vehicles, and I was involved in a political race at that time. The last thing I wanted to be known for was little green people or UFOs.
My husband also thought I was nuts, and so I didn't talk about it too much.
What is interesting, tragic, and amusing all at the one and the same time is that lots of people are afraid to talk about it. Their friends will laugh at them and so forth. And we need to let those people feel safe and talk about it.
On August 25th of 1984, Hynek came to the Hudson Valley and he gave a talk at the middle school there. This was the last case that he was involved with before he died, and it made a huge impression on him.
Here's a sketch of the thing going on in Westchester County now. This is large boomerang-shaped object that moves slowly, far below the stall speed of aircraft, moves silently. I've been told by highly responsible witnesses that it is as large as a football field.
It speaks to the importance of the Hudson Valley wave that J. Allen Hynek came here. He thought it was important enough to speak to the witnesses, to go to the sites.
I spent a weekend with Dr. Hynek. Dr. Hynek could ask you a question and he'd sit back and he would listen. And if one of my kids jumped into the conversation, he would just kindly just put up his hand and go, "I'll get right back to you," with a little wink. And you were the most important person for that moment he was talking to you. That's the way he made me feel.
It was very important for these witnesses who were not getting any official recognition that somebody like J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer who had worked for the government, that he came there and spoke with them and took them seriously.
And we walked through the whole sighting. He wanted to go every place. And every time we made a stop, he said, "What were you feeling? Did you feel anything in your gut? Did you feel connected to this object?"
It made a huge difference to have him on site during the wave.
In the Westchester case in New York, for instance, we had witnesses geographically independent of each other, didn't know each other, and yet reported identically the same things. Now, you cannot call that mass hallucination.
Lack of scientific involvement or government acknowledgement of UFOs encourages people's imaginations to go wild with, what are they hiding?
We called the police when we got home, and they didn't tell us that night, but a couple of days later we were reading they thought they were ultralights, the planes.
The chief meteorologist at the Westchester County Airport, with some 25 years experience, told me that when he saw it, it moved very slowly like a ship docking at a berth. Now, that cannot possibly be ultralights flying in formation. That's just out of the question.
Yeah, the planes flying in formation is one of the reasons cited, including an article in Discover magazine.
This article that was in Discover magazine talks about the pilots who were going up and hoaxing UFOs, and it implies that that's probably what all the sightings were.
Do you hear the engines?
Planes fly all the time. Do you hear 7,000 people coming out and saying, "Ah, I saw planes over my head"? No, they saw something different.
Ultralights, they make noise.
They do make noise.
So we've never had a good explanation.
So these pilots did a huge disservice by creating this hoax situation to confuse everything and to bring a lack of credibility and to give the government something to hang their hat on when they were asked what people were actually seeing.
People began doubting themselves. It kept the entire wave suppressed.
Hynek was just stunned by the fact that this was not getting attention.
The subject came up in the United Nations recently. We have reports from 133 different countries. And the same pattern exists around the world. It's not just localized in one particular country, you see.
So while our government was telling the public that there was nothing to UFOs, that the investigations had all been shut down, documents reveal that officials were, in fact, monitoring cases in other countries.
What they were seeing was very similar to what was seen in the Hudson Valley.
This map was prepared by Dr. Jacques Vallée. UFO reports are truly global, and they seem to occur in waves, or flaps as they are often called. But notice how the flaps have been distributed throughout the years and over the world.
This is truly an international phenomenon. There's no question about it. There's a very similar pattern, very similar reports. Foreign militaries are also having encounters. The Belgian Air Force had some extraordinary encounters.
Des personnes affirment avoir vu longuement et à plusieurs reprises des objets volants et lumineux de forme triangulaire.
Ils ont vu dans le ciel un phénomène étrange, un ovni.
A few years after the Hudson Valley wave, a very similar wave occurred in Belgium.
These large black triangles, again, all the characteristics, silent, low, beams of light, hovering.
Belgian authorities would scramble jets in order to try to get a better look at the objects. They wanted to identify what it was that was invading protected airspace over their country. It felt that this was their responsibility.
The F-16s that the Belgian military had tracked these objects on radar. So they actually have radar imagery of the unknown moving through Belgian airspace.
And the contrast from how the Belgian government handled it there versus how our government didn't handle the events in Hudson Valley are really striking. The Belgian Air Force became actively involved with a group of scientists to collect reports from witnesses. They assigned a colonel to head up an investigation.
Voilà, ici vous voyez le vecteur de l'objectif 300 degrés.
And they held a press conference packed with media in which they disclosed everything they knew and how they were approaching this.
350, 400 nœuds.
And the public were encouraged to file reports.
J'ai regardé cette chose passer au-dessus de chez moi. Moi, je l'estime entre 20 et 25 mètres, peut-être plus. Et alors sans bruit. Il n'y avait pas du tout de bruit.
Air Force officers were coming forward and speaking about it. They gave it a legitimacy that we have yet to see here in this country.
You said the government stopped investigating back in 1969. Do these UFO watchers have any reason to expect the government to get re-involved in investigating these claims?
Right now, they're a bit disappointed the government has not gotten more involved than it has in the last 10 years. But we do know that the CIA and the Defense Department has been doing some research into other sightings in other nations like the Soviet Union and Iran. But in the United States, they seem very skeptical.
The Belgian case was documented by U.S. government officials. Colonel de Brouwer had approached American officials to inquire whether this was ours. And we had told them no. And we had said also, we'd like to know whose it was. So there was a document filed about the Belgian wave, but no document filed about a wave in our own country, at least that we are aware of.
To me, the greatest evidence for the existence of something strange going on is the caliber of many of the witnesses. For instance, in Westchester, we had meteorologists, Navy test pilot, IBM executives, a priest,
Are they all saying the same thing, that it is not explainable to them by any conventional explanation?
You just said it, Charlie. That's exactly what they're saying. They're seeing the same things.
You know, there were so many people that saw it. It wasn't, you know, if I saw it alone, I probably wouldn't have told anybody. If the three of us saw it, I might have told my family.
Right. Yeah.
But there were so many people that saw it that I was fine with, you know, spreading the word.
Me too.
And everybody that I told said they were sorry they didn't see it.
A lot of people took solace in the fact that Hynek was a guy who was on their side. If you witnessed a UFO, Hynek was one person who would take you seriously, wouldn't make fun of you, and really try to get a full picture of your experience. And that's so huge to someone who has seen something weird in the sky and doesn't know how to tell anyone about it.
I felt validated. That's the way Dr. Hynek made me feel. So I could say, there's nothing wrong with me, and nothing wrong with my eyes, and nothing wrong with my intuition. They're all intact.
Dr. Hynek was someone who was very alive, very open. He told me once that the reason he became interested in UFOs was about the challenges, about, you know, what is this world? If this is real, what does that mean for human existence?
The last thing Hynek did before leaving this earth was try to understand the nature of the denial and the disconnect among human beings when something this dramatic happens. Hynek wrote an essay. It was a rough draft that was left on his computer when he died. He said, how is it possible that in the United States, where even trivial events are often flashed across the world, only one national TV and radio network carried an account of these utterly astounding sightings? Was no one minding the store? Was everyone asleep at the switch? Hynek was a different person than he was previously when he worked at Project Blue Book. Here he was saying UFOs, they're of scientific interest. The witnesses should be taken seriously. It was just the most profoundly important moment and setting a course of events that continued through the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Starting as a complete skeptic, I underwent a transformation. And now, I guess the best way of saying it is it's an itch that I just have to scratch. I feel that we have a phenomenon that could be of tremendous potential importance to the human race. I feel that strongly about it.
It's a definite UFO or something like that. It just flew right over me.
This is highly restricted airspace. You don't want something up there that doesn't belong there.
The culture as a whole didn't really take UFOs seriously.
I stuck with it despite the level of ridicule for decades.
He described it as a huge ball with lights running around it. He said it was about 4 times bigger than the 747.
And my immediate response was, I want to break the story.
Spinner 1628 Heavy Anchorage. Good afternoon, squawk 1550. Go ahead.
Do you have any traffic in front of us?
Spinner 1628 Heavy, negative.
左前方になんかこう明かりが2つですね。
1986, over Alaska, Japan Airlines encountered something truly inexplicable in the night sky.
These guys were flying from Paris to Tokyo. They noticed a very bright light, and it's following them.
Spinner 1628 Heavy, sir. If you're able to identify the type of aircraft, and see if you can tell whether it's military or civilian.
We cannot identify the type, but things very quite big.
The pilot, Kenju Tarachi, had described it as being several times larger than his airplane, and his airplane had an elevator in it.
It was huge. And Captain Tarachi was open about the fact that he was afraid during this event. But the Japanese airline incident was hardly unique.
We just had something go right over the top of us. It's a definite UFO or something like that.
Incidences like this were much more widespread than anybody realized.
I have no idea what that is. It just flew right over me. The length is unbelievable. Looks like a UFO.
UFOs definitely represented an aviation safety hazard. There were many cases documented that showed that. And yet, the government didn't seem to care.
In tonight's special report, Mary Murphy finds that while the U.S. government has closed its eyes on the matter, the public hasn't stopped seeing or believing.
The U.S. government closed its formal study of UFOs in late 1969.
The cases that required investigation, none of that went away. And so people stepped in to fill that void.
UFO reporting center.
We got a call. He saw 5 distinct lights in a triangular pattern.
Thankfully, these events were recorded by civilian researchers. It showed that the phenomenon was continuing and that it was extensive, that it was widespread.
I mean, look what these people are saying. Look what they've documented. This is real, and it's a safety hazard.
We get reports every night.
I don't know what the hell it is. It looks like a rotating light around it.
I'd like to report a UFO.
Ufology today is in the state, I would say, that, say, chemistry was when chemistry was alchemy.
a mixture of superstition, wild ideas, unproved claims, and yet out of that whole mess, finally the very first-class science of chemistry evolved. What we need in ufology is to make it professional.
J. Allen Hynek was a great advocate for civilians to be researching UFOs. He felt that the subject deserved scientific scrutiny.
Dr. Hynek's been studying UFOs for 30 years. His files contain unexplained sightings from 140 countries.
After Hynek died in 1986, his work was carried on by a handful of national UFO research groups. Even though the government wasn't paying attention, the civilians were.
Bill Ambrosio of Greenwich, Connecticut, has recorded more than 300 hours of conversations with people who've reported UFO sightings.
Larry Fawcett, a police officer in Coventry, Connecticut. He helped establish Citizens Against UFO Secrecy.
UFO Request Center? I have never been a believer of UFOs in my entire life, and I just seen a minimum of 9 this morning with my own eyes, and I mean, I'm a believer.
My goal in writing about UFOs has been mainly to bring information forward to the public, but beyond that, it's to motivate the official world to pay attention. Once I realized that there was enough data to show that these things are real and the possibility that there are other civilizations visiting us here, I was just hooked. And I realized that I needed information that could be verified and documented and cases that were irrefutable. I turned to the most credible civilian researchers because they were the ones doing the work. The National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena, NARCAP, was founded by Dr. Richard Haynes, who is a former chief scientist for NASA. Hey, Dick, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Sure is good to see you. What is your reflection on, looking back at NARCAP, like why you started it?
Well, I'd spent quite a number of years as a hobby studying this phenomenon, and I finally came to the understanding that ufology, the study of UFOs or UAPs these days, is not going to progress until there's some practical benefit from it. And so I came up with this idea, let's look at aviation safety.
The FAA did not want to receive any reports from any of their personnel about UFO events. It was actually written in their manual that if anyone saw a UFO, they were to report it to a civilian group.
NARCAP is a reporting center for pilots and air traffic controllers who would like to make a report of their sightings in a completely confidential manner. We are looking carefully at events that are happening in our skies all the time where flight safety could be impacted. Our objective is to make flying safer.
The work I did with NARCAP and really getting familiar with the aviation safety hazards, I became more focused on that as an important component of this whole issue. The second story that I ever published on UFOs in 2001 was based on a 100-page report that NARCAP produced. There were cases where the pilot would have to make a very fast turn or he'd have to dive to avoid hitting a UFO. Cases where passengers were actually injured by maneuvers the airplane had to make. If you have commercial pilots that are somehow in danger, I just thought as a journalist, this is really important. I mean, how could the aviation world ignore this? One of the most fascinating cases in the report was the Japan Airlines case, 1986.
Spinner 1628, have a register. I'm picking up a hit on the radar approximately 5 miles in trail, your 6 o'clock position.
What was really compelling about this case is that you have the radar data, and then you got the testimony of the pilot talking to ground control.
Do you still have visual contact? Oh, same position.
There are these amazing tapes in Richard Haynes' archive of calls he made, and the pilots will give him detailed accounts of what they saw. One of the recordings was with Captain Tarachi from the Japan Airlines case.
How long did it take to move from the 12 o'clock position?
ものすごい早いですね。そこを私ずっと見てましたので、追求はできませんでした。それでなんかわかんないけどもずっとついてくると言って、
As they're approaching Anchorage, they again radio the FAA. And they had the plane do a couple of turns to see if the object continues to follow it.
Summoner, request you making a right turn 360 degrees, 360-degree turn, and advise me what your traffic does then.
Captain Tarucci was very surprised to realize that the object was still beside him throughout that turn. How is it able to do that? Why would it do that?
The phenomenon acts with what I would call curiosity. To me, that's intelligence.
It raises some fundamental questions about the nature of the phenomenon. Would it constitute a threat to flight safety? And the answer is clearly yes.
The Japan Airlines event was fairly lengthy as UFO sightings go.
They watched it for perhaps a half hour or more. It moved in different positions around the aircraft. Eventually, as they descended and approached the airport, it disappeared.
But the real import of the case is what happens after the sighting.
Captain Tarucci spoke to the American press about this event, and Japan Airlines took him off the job for like a year. It just shows that professional pilots cannot report an actual event that happened that might even be a hazard to their aircraft without facing repercussions.
Now on the phone with us from Anchorage is Paul Stuckey, who's public affairs officer for the FAA in the Alaska region. What, Paul, does the FAA say this is?
Well, we've got some possible evidence of confirmation, but it is not real strong. And the military is totally unable to confirm whether this object was real by its radar, and neither are we, actually.
Publicly, the FAA said that the object on radar was an unexplained split image of the Japanese 747 and not a separate object. But there was more going on with this case than what the FAA had to say publicly. When John Callahan, who was the head of accidents and investigations at FAA, first heard about this event, he ordered that all the data be sent to him immediately on this case.
I said to the software people, I want a briefing in the next room. I want to see on a chart every place where the Japanese guy was, and I want to see all the targets around him. I watched on radar. I took a videotape of it, and the next day came back to Washington headquarters. This is where it first starts. It starts at 19 after the hour. You see that little dot? That's the UFO.
He studied all this data, and then, according to Callahan, he was called to a meeting at the Washington headquarters. That meeting involved a team of representatives from the White House. It included CIA representatives.
That's strange. These things are not typically investigated by the FBI, not the CIA.
I play the tapes for them. I show them all the paperwork we got. I give them the whole tale, and they were all excited about it. So I'm standing next to this little guy, and he says, okay, we were never here. We're confiscating all this data, and you're all sworn to secrecy. So I said, what do you think it is? I'm still thinking it's the stealth bomber. He says, well, it's a UFO.
So the U.S. government doesn't take UFOs seriously, and yet they do this? So what's going on here? Well, of course, we don't know, because it disappeared into the black maw of the government.
My story about pilot encounters with UFOs got a lot of play, and it was picked up all across the country, but the culture as a whole didn't really take UFOs seriously. It was still considered fringe. And I felt kind of determined to fight that.
Have you ever wondered why there wasn't more coverage in the mainstream media about the subject of UFOs? We are very pleased today to have an investigative journalist who has pushed through that barrier, Leslie Kean. Thank you so much for joining us.
When I started out reporting on UFOs, I felt like I was risking my career as a journalist. I did feel that way. I was sort of an anomaly. There was nobody doing this in the mainstream. I was really nervous about being ridiculed. because the attitudes of people were mainly that it was a joke. If I would go to a party and people said, "What do you do?" I would have to say, "Well, I'm a journalist." And then the next question was always, "Well, what do you write about?" And I was dreading that question. I did not want to have to say what I wrote about. It was embarrassing. But the fact that there was so much opposition to it, the fact that it was ridiculed, actually kind of fueled my fire. And I felt so clear that there was something to it that I just was willing to take that risk. And then I realized that there were others who are out there researching this, taking it out of the fringe, who took it upon themselves to do what the government wasn't doing, which was to investigate cases.
Your new documentary, James, I Know What I Saw, assembles accounts from various UFO witnesses from around the world. What do you believe, James?
I believe that there are structured craft of unknown origin whizzing around in our airspace whose flight characteristics are so beyond anything we've had. My name is James Fox. I have been working on UFO films for coming up on my third decade. I was never out to prove that ET has landed. My primary objective is to say there is some really compelling evidence that needs further investigation. I stuck with it despite the level of ridicule for decades because I had gone to locations, I'd met with the witnesses, I'd looked up the documents from government files because I wanted to create a body of evidence that I could present to mainstream and say, look, there's something to it.
Over the years, James Fox and I had a kind of cooperative relationship, and we shared a frustration about the lack of government investigation, the lack of transparency, this sort of blasé attitude that it didn't matter. James had experienced this frustration for a long time in so many cases that he investigated, one of them being the Phoenix Lights of 1997.
We're visiting with James Fox, filmmaker in town, doing research on the UFOs and interviews.
What makes the Phoenix Lights UFO case so compelling is the sheer volume of eyewitness testimony.
Hundreds of witnesses saw something gliding over the state of Arizona for over an hour and a half.
It was Thursday night, March 13th, 1997.
Nice, calm evening, about 8:30.
My daughter, Monica, came running in the house and said, "You've got to come outside."
As I closed both windows and I looked to the north, I saw a large black craft coming right towards us. And I told my wife at that time, I said, that son of a bitch is a mile long.
I was working on a film at the time on UFOs, and so I saw the progression of this whole story unfold.
It barely missed that mountain.
Really?
Yeah, came floating over the mountain.
The witnesses described this boomerang-shaped object that was over a mile across from wingtip to wingtip.
It's coming across the sky, and as it's moving, it's blocking and unblocking the stars. There is actually a shape.
We were just in awe of it. I mean, no fear or anything, just kind of like, oh, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen.
I thought I was going to pass out because I stopped breathing. I was so enthralled in looking at this thing.
The Phoenix Lights event in March is being talked about now all over the world.
The buzz is very big in the desert Southwest after some weird happenings in the skies over Phoenix recently.
The objects in the sky over Arizona were probably seen by more witnesses than any other single UFO event in American history.
So many people wanted answers that the governor had to respond.
The governor had said he was going to provide answers for people. They built up this hope and expectation. There's been an investigation and we're going to get something here.
I believe it a serious offense for anyone, human, space alien, or otherwise, to engage in mysterious activity in our nighttime skies. That is why I will personally ask that the perpetrator be prosecuted to the fullest for the havoc wrought on our entire community. Don't get him too close to me, please. Now, this just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious.
He had one of his aides dressed up in an alien suit, and he made a mockery of the whole thing. And I was in touch with the witnesses, and they were just furious.
Thank you. Thank you.
That case is, I think, pretty much representative of how the U.S. government treats the phenomenon.
Even this mass sighting, which involved hundreds of witnesses and lots of concern in the state of Arizona, even that was not enough to get government involvement and to get government accountability. The lack of transparency within the American government on this topic was so frustrating. But James and I have both discovered that there are other countries that really take this seriously.
As a filmmaker, I was able to have a level of participation from foreign governments and military personnel that I didn't see in the United States.
James and I went to France together to the headquarters of the French agency that studies UFOs, situated within the equivalent of NASA in France, in the Space Studies Center. France sees it as a scientific problem. They had access to specialists from all over the country who would contribute to investigations. So if they needed a weather specialist or a soil expert, psychologists who would interview the witnesses, all these different areas of expertise that all have a role to play in an investigation.
I meet with military people in China and in Russia and in Africa and Australia and South America. There were similar things happening all around the world. There was a very compelling incident that happened in Tehran, Iran in 1976 that involved a pilot trying to shoot down a UFO. The pilot's name was Parviz Jafari, and he described this whole cat and mouse thing with this object. He said it could literally go from this point in the sky to this point in the sky in the blink of an eye, and he said that was miles.
I was looking here at about 70 miles out, and he jumps all of a sudden 10 degrees to my right. I was wondering, what is it?
At one point, I think he felt threatened and decided to shoot it. That turned out to be not such a good idea. His whole control panel froze up. He was thinking he might have to eject from the airplane.
When that thing went away, our radio became operative again.
Jafari made a very important contribution by speaking out about this. And in Iran, none of it was kept secret. It was a big event in that country. Countries in South America also took reports from pilots a lot more seriously. The government of Chile sees it as mainly an aviation issue.
De que la gente está tomando conciencia de que existe un cierto fenómeno que debe ser analizado desde un punto de vista multidisciplinario.
Costa Rica also does not keep things secret. They had what I think may be the best photograph of a UFO ever released that was taken by a government mapping plane. That photograph was made public. It was studied by scientists. We don't know what our government actually possesses in terms of photographs or videos because they've been kept classified. In America, UFOs became really prevalent during the Cold War. And during the Cold War, we did not want to disclose anything. So that's sort of when we got in the groove of keeping it secret. It just sort of became ingrained in our system to see this as a national security issue, which therefore needs to be classified. Some of these other governments, they look at it as an aviation safety problem, perhaps, or a scientific problem. To me, this is the way things should be done. After returning from these explorations of other countries, I brought that information to a very important government insider who I'd met in 2001, who was all about government transparency. John Podesta was President Clinton's chief of staff, and under Clinton, he was partly responsible for the release of many, many documents through the Freedom of Information Act.
I came into this really as an advocate of open government, more than I had thought a lot about UFOs or UAPs. They were a curiosity for me, really, but the two interests kind of married in 2001 when I met Leslie Kean.
I think it's time to open the books on the question of government investigations of UFOs. It's time to find out what the truth really is that's out there.
I think there has been fear that if the government ever tipped their hand to say, well, we have some phenomena and we don't know what it is, the public would just freak out. And I think quite the contrary. I think the public can handle the truth.
I would go to these countries and then I put together information about how these agencies worked into a dossier, and I gave it to John Podesta.
You know, until the United States government joins and has their own official agency, like the French, like the British, like the people in Chile, the people in Peru, it kind of holds back the whole world.
In that dossier were 2 letters to John Podesta, specifically to him, one written by the head of the Chilean government agency studying UFOs, and one written by the head of the French agency, explaining why they felt it was absolutely crucial that the United States be involved if we're going to make any progress with this.
I think it's important for investigative journalists like Leslie Kean to keep pressing for answers. So I put my credibility on the line, and I supported her efforts to open the space for politicians to say it may be a question of national security. It is a question of aviation safety.
It seemed like what we really needed was some kind of major UFO event, a major case with lots of data, with great witnesses, that would galvanize the country, that would be in the media, and that would force government involvement.
Tower, this is Dan.
Hey, Dave, it's just from United Tower. Hey, did you see a flying disc out by C-17?
November 7th, 2006. Something happened over O'Hare Airport. An event that, once again, suggests a problem with aviation safety, this time over one of the country's busiest airports.
You had workers on the tarmac and the pilots, and these guys look up at around 1,000 feet. They see a disc-shaped object above them.
Some of our pilots on the ground were reporting a UFO sighting at 1,000 feet.
You don't believe this was possibly your imagination?
It was definitely not my imagination.
Joe was a mechanic for United Airlines. While taxiing a jumbo jet to the hangar, he and another mechanic
noticed an object up in the sky sitting above the terminal complex.
It had a metallic grayish appearance to it. It appeared to be 30 to 40 feet in diameter. It's not moving at all. I mean, there's no motion. And this goes on for a few minutes until suddenly the object just goes straight up. And in doing so, burns a hole through the clouds.
Dude, there was a disc out there flying around.
There was a what?
A disc.
A disc? Like a frisbee?
Like a UFO type thing.
My name is John Hilkovich. I was transportation reporter at Chicago Tribune for roughly 18 years. A few days after the alleged sighting, I got a phone call from an official with the National UFO Reporting Center. I think he assumed that I had heard about this, and he wanted to know, was I working on a story? I covered transportation. UFO was not part of the beat at all. So, you know, I had my healthy reporter's skepticism about this, but this is highly restricted airspace. You don't want something up there that doesn't belong there. So I took that information and contacted the FAA and United Airlines, and they both denied any knowledge of this alleged sighting. They were sort of amused by it, like, are you okay, John? You know, you're asking these weird questions. I spent the next couple of weeks interviewing as many people as I could about this sighting. These were all trained aviation professionals, pilots who were taxiing on the ground, ramp workers who were pushing back planes. Given the pushback from the FAA, I submitted a FOIA request for the logs at O'Hare Tower for that day, November 7th.
Somebody reported a UFO or a flying disc above Charlie Concourse, seriously.
Excellent.
Yeah.
We saw it a half hour ago. A whole bunch of us over at the Charlie Concourse.
Really?
When I heard the recordings, it was clear that this alleged sighting was logged in O'Hare Tower. The United Airlines was told about this by numerous employees. There was just an abundance of radio chatter between O'Hare Tower and various people on the airfield.
You're seeing flying discs.
Well, that's what the pilot and the ramp guys are telling us. The C-17, they saw some flying disc above, and we can't see above us.
Sue.
You didn't see it, right?
I have not seen anything, Sue. And if I did, I wouldn't admit to it.
United, despite their insistence to me that they had no knowledge of this and they took no action, was first to backtrack to say that, yes, it had received reports of this. And then the FAA said that upon further review, yes, they had received calls saying that something was up there.
Is it standard that the FAA, if you ask them a straightforward question, would lie, essentially?
Well, I mean, there's nothing standard about this story. This story ran on page 1 of the Chicago Tribune on January 1st, 2007, and the reaction to it was unbelievable.
John, the response has been, well, out of this world, hasn't it?
I mean, just the last 2 days, this is my email.
Several pilots, apparently, to Chicago's O'Hare swear they saw one, a UFO.
It looked like literally someone had poked a hole in the clouds.
It got more hits on the Chicago Tribune website than any story they had ever written in the past. But there was still a very strong taboo against this, so there were some skeptics that were called on these various shows who kind of debunked it.
Return to the chief astronomer for the Franklin Institute, Derek Pitts. Derek, thanks for being with us again.
My pleasure, Keith.
All right, let's start with the UFO sighting at O'Hare. When it's pilots saying this, do we have to listen? And then what is it they could have seen but not been able to identify?
Well, that's a really difficult question to answer because there are all kinds of sky phenomena that could have manifested themselves, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are alien spacecraft.
I was intrigued that so many people had seen this. But we can't just suggest, here's a spacecraft from another planet that defies the laws of physics. So for me, I go to those things that seem much more likely, much more reasonable, much more possible.
When I read the Chicago Tribune story, I was really shocked by the FAA efforts to try and explain this away. First of all, they said it was airport lights reflecting off the clouds. And it turned out that the airport lights had not even been turned on yet when the event occurred. So that explanation didn't work.
The FAA adds that the sighting might have been caused by a weather phenomenon.
The next explanation they provided was that it was a weather phenomenon. I knew what that probably meant was this phenomenon called a hole punch cloud. It's very rare, where ice crystals fall from one cloud above to a lower cloud and they melt a hole in the cloud. I called a bunch of cloud experts, asked what the conditions were that would be required for a hole punch cloud to form. I learned that the temperature would have to be below freezing, which it was not at that day at O'Hare. It was around 50 degrees. So I was able to completely dispatch the FAA's explanation of a weather phenomenon. For the FAA and the government, it's just come up with something to make it go away, no matter how ludicrous it is, no matter how inaccurate it is. This was an aviation safety hazard. This thing was floating over an airport. It made me feel inspired to really want to do more because this just can't keep going like this.
In 2006, we had that very compelling case that happened at O'Hare Airport. That got a lot of media coverage. We were coming up on the 10-year anniversary for the Phoenix Lights case. That was getting a lot of coverage, and there seemed to be a whole new wave of interest in the media on the phenomenon. And I decided to kind of strike while the iron's hot. Ever since the Phoenix Lights case, I was meeting with the witnesses and I heard their frustration with how the governor treated their testimony by making a mockery and ridiculing. So in 2006, I managed to get a hold of Fife Symington, who was no longer governor of Arizona. He responded immediately and accepted my invitation for an interview. And it ended up being one of those aha moments for me as a reporter.
If you had to do it over again, would you have done it any differently?
You know, I think it was a legitimate occurrence of unknown origin, probably one of the major sightings in, you know, in modern history in the country, because a lot of people saw it in Maricopa County, and I saw it too. So
And I saw it too. Did I just hear that straight? Did the former governor of Arizona, who made fun of one of the most significant modern-day mass sightings, just admit that he, too, was a witness?
at least I have the opportunity now to correct the record, and that's important.
I knew I had captured lightning in a bottle. I really knew this was going to be big. So I reached out to Leslie Kane, who I said, hey, you're not going to believe this.
I could not believe it. And my immediate response was, I want to break this story.
Leslie helped get that story out, and we got a lot of news coverage.
If you had been here 10 years ago and standing out here and looking up there at the lights and the view, you would have been astounded. You would have been amazed. And I suspect that unless the Defense Department proves us otherwise, that it was probably some form of an alien spacecraft.
There was momentum that started to build, and it was sort of a catalyst for us to feel, look at what's going on. Let's do something really big that will draw attention to this. I joined forces with James Fox, and we decided to bring together a panel of the very most credible witnesses from all over the world to a major event in Washington, which would draw a new level of attention to incidences like the O'Hare event.
We had scientists, generals, pilots, both military and civilian, from multiple countries.
Among them was Parviz Jafari, the Iranian pilot who had tried to shoot down a UFO, John Callahan from the Japan Airlines case.
And the moderator of the event was former governor of Arizona, Fife Symington.
He recognized that if there had been an agency in place when this event happened in 1997, everything would have been different.
Leslie and I wanted to see if we could set up a new government agency, a modern-day Project Blue Book.
I'd like to welcome you all here today, and I don't think there's ever been a more high-level or distinguished group.
This event was the culmination of all the work I had done previously to bring everybody together in one room like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Jean-Charles Duboc. I am a retired Air Force captain.
Soy el capitán.
I am Rodrigo Bravo, captain and pilot of the Chilean Army.
What I'm about to tell you is about an event that never happened.
The power of this was that you had all these people in one room telling their stories one after the other.
Buenos días, damas y caballeros.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Oscar Santamaria Huertas, official pilot of the Peruvian Air Force, currently retired.
Oscar Santamaria encountered a UFO over an air base in Peru, and he was instructed to go up and shoot it down.
My unit commander ordered me to take off in my Sukhoi 22 jet to shoot down the spherical object.
He said he unleashed all of his firepower, direct target hit, and it just absorbed his bullets.
The cone-shaped wall of fire that I sent out will normally obliterate anything in its path.
We also had Parviz Jafari, who talked about what happened to him.
I tried to launch a heat-seeker missile to it, but my missile panel went out.
The momentum just kept building and building and building.
Hundreds of people saw a majestic triangular craft.
I have no idea what we saw that night, but I do know with great certainty it was under intelligent control.
There's something very pragmatic about pilots, particularly military pilots. When you hear enough of those cases from around the world, I felt like the government had to pay attention.
We want the United States government to stop perpetuating the myth that all UFOs can be explained away in down-to-earth and conventional terms. Instead, our country needs to reopen its official investigation that it shut down in 1969.
We made the appeal at that press conference for a government agency to be set up.
Do I look all right? Because my wife will yell at me if I don't.
When it comes to events of this nature, dealing with the great unknown, we deserve, I believe, more openness and a serious pursuit of the facts by our government. Thank you very much.
That press conference was a moment for all of us. All of us had been in the trenches for all those decades. It was a very satisfying moment, and we got some very mainstream coverage.
A group gathering here in Washington to talk about their UFO sightings, but this apparently is no crackpot convention. Former high-level government and military officials are among those sharing what they've seen in the skies.
The press conference felt like a moment of huge success. But I had this fantasy, well, maybe this will lead to some kind of hearings on this. Nothing. Nobody in the government batted an eyelash. It didn't accomplish what we had hoped for, which was to get our government engaging with it. I thought that the 5-minute presentations that these witnesses made simply weren't long enough to really get across what happened to them. So I was inspired to bring these people into a book. And and they reported on their cases in their own words. They wrote their own chapters. I don't think people at that level had ever come together under one umbrella before, and it had a lot of authority to it, not because of me, but because of the people I brought to the book. When it became a New York Times bestseller, I think it brought heightened credibility to the topic.
Our next guest calling for a formal investigation of unidentified flying objects, Leslie Kean.
I'm here to talk about UFOs, Leslie Kean.
Please welcome Leslie Kean. Real generals or like Captain Crunch? Like real generals? What generals think that there are aliens out there?
They don't think they're aliens, and that's one of the points they all make in this book, is we don't know what they are.
All right. Thank you so much, Leslie Kean.
When I first read Leslie Kean's book, I thought her investigation of this was exactly the kind of real science investigation that we should be thinking about starting around unidentified flying objects. In fact, I had Leslie as a guest here at the Franklin Institute to give a presentation about her book. We're about real science. We are not about speculation. And I felt that the work that Leslie demonstrated in her book was a responsible way to go about this.
I wrote the foreword to her book, which at the time people thought was just something to go on the shelf with the other ufologies, but was really, I think, a serious effort to try to document what pilots had seen, what other military senior leaders had documented.
The success of the book brought so much credibility to this topic, and it drew people into my life that hadn't been there before. Insiders who have been involved with this thing for a long time, some of them with security clearances, and they trusted me. That's what led to my being invited to a meeting years later where I was handed the biggest scoop of my career.
Leslie Kean, one of the investigative reporters who broke this story. This report is stunning.
The New York Times breaking the news that the Pentagon has been secretly researching the possible existence of UFOs. Apparently, the Department of Defense launched the program in 2007.
2007, the same year that we gave our press conference, it just so happened that this government program was already being set up. We didn't know about that at the time, of course, but it was actually happening.
The article was a huge moment, a moment I'll never forget. I had friends and family from all around the world going, oh my God, maybe you were right. Maybe you're not as crazy as I thought you were, you know? It was a good feeling. I was really proud of Leslie because the rest of the world was paying attention that maybe there is really something going on here.
That article was really just the beginning. It opened the door to all these questions that arose after that about what this program actually had learned about UFOs. Is it going to release information to the public? All these questions that people want to know about UFOs. Well, if there's a program, what do they know? Imagine just how wonderful it would be to have those questions asked on behalf of the American people.
Today, we will bring that organization out of the shadows. I think for far too long, people have said, oh, the public isn't ready to know about these things. But I think that the public is ready, now more than ever.
We were seeing things off the coast every day.
The pilots know what they are seeing. They are not crazy.
You just have to realize that it's using a kind of technology that we don't understand.
One of these objects happened to be from another civilization. That would change the future of humanity.
Can you start off by telling me your name and a little bit about your career in the Navy?
My name is Ryan Graves. I was a lieutenant in the Navy for about 11 years. And I was with the VFA 11 Red Rippers. In 2015, we were aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt. While we were off the coast of Virginia Beach, what we were seeing out there were essentially radar contacts that we didn't think belonged there. Two aircraft from my squadron were flying out to the area one day. They were about 100 feet or so apart. As they were flying through the area, the lead pilot in this aircraft saw an object zip right by his aircraft. What they described was a dark cube inside some type of clear sphere where the corners of the cube were touching the inside of that sphere. When the crew came back, they were shocked. They were like, hey, we almost hit one of those damn things. There was really no answer of what it was. And so our squadron filed a safety report, and we continued filing reports.
Ryan Graves and many other pilots reported these strange encounters with these unknown aircraft that had no wings, no cockpit, no intakes, no exhaust, and that were somehow seemingly able to fly.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh.
They began to have numerous encounters, weekly, almost daily in some cases. This continued month after month, year after year.
I can't tell you how many times I've talked to pilots, both civilian and military, say, hey, Lou, the reason why I didn't report this because I didn't want to lose my job. I got a mortgage to pay, I got kids. You know, if I report this, they're going to think I'm crazy.
So we've been battling this stigma for a while. But I couldn't just ignore the things that I was seeing just because everyone else was uncomfortable talking about it. It's just a matter of time until there's a mid-air collision.
You can't muzzle, you can't squelch the truth. Our entire democracy is based on the principles of truth.
We get reports every night. I don't know what the hell it is. Looks like a rotating light around it. I'd like to report a UFO.
The government's UFO files are stored here at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. Notes, documents, and interviews on 12,618 UFO cases. Since 1969, the investigation has been closed.
They said all of this stuff was not to be taken seriously or believed. Even though there were 701 cases still on the table that were unexplained.
There is nothing in Air Force files that come to a conclusion that spaceships have visited the Earth.
When the government said, you're not seeing what you're seeing, that immediately created a distrust in the government.
UFO activists have gotten mighty vocal in recent weeks.
We want the truth! We want the truth!
Because of that mistrust, people developed all kinds of conspiracy theories. Many conspiracy theories start with a kernel of truth. So you had a lot of focus, for instance, on Area 51, a secret facility in the Nevada desert.
The base has been cloaked in secrecy for decades.
Area 51 is the place where some of our most advanced, legendary aircraft were developed in secret for the CIA and for the Air Force. But the excessive secrecy launched an entire mythology that they have crashed spaceships that are being reverse engineered at Area 51.
Area 51, where the military has conducted...
For the past 50 years, classified experiments involving extraterrestrial technology.
What can you say goes on at this test facility?
Darn little.
Part of the mythology is that there's an alien craft stored there, and this stems from a crash of something in Roswell, New Mexico in the 1940s.
For people who are deep into the UFO experience, they believe that whatever was discovered at Roswell was taken at some point to Area 51.
If there are, in fact, any extraterrestrial type equipment or anything that's been recovered, it's most likely out here somewhere.
I've been to Area 51 on more than one occasion, and it was just really interesting, some of the stuff. They had a Soviet helicopter, but my personal feeling and all the knowledge I have, I think anyone that talks about having wreckages from outer space, and I just don't think that exists. But the American people want information. The one way we always get in trouble in government is trying to hide stuff, trying to be non-transparent.
Harry Reid played such a critical role to the progress that we've made on the UFO issue. He instigated a program at the Department of Defense to investigate UFOs, and he became very outspoken about the need for an official disclosure and transparency.
As far as I'm concerned, there needs to be a tremendous amount of government resources put into this because the American people are entitled to know what the hell's going on.
The New York Times detailing our nation's secretive search for signs of intelligent life. The Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program purportedly dates back to 2007, and one of its patron saints is said to be former Senator Harry Reid.
The military spending millions of dollars to look into UFO sightings and videos from American fighter pilots all being made public.
The New York Times article that came out in 2017 started this journey for us as a country. It revealed several things. First of all, the fact that the U.S. government was still looking at UFOs and that there was enough information there to convince a lot of people that it was real.
When you learn about a program on UFOs, and then we see the videos were released, and well, this is fantastic. What we've now had to come to grips with is that we have not learned hardly anything about the specifics of what they did in this secret project.
President Obama says that there is footage and records of objects in the skies, these unidentified aerial phenomenon, and he says we don't know exactly what they are. What do you think that it is?
I would ask him again. Thank you.
You can only imagine what they have and what they've learned in this secret program that they're not revealing to us. When are we going to have access to that?
If you hide the information rather than revealing it to everyone, then it becomes much easier for it to be seen as conspiratorial. So being able to shed light on all of this and make it available for objective study can eliminate the conspiracy aspect of it. Any of this.
With the information we have right now, there's no reason, in my opinion, why they shouldn't do some public hearings on this. It's a perfect time to do it.
Harry Reid remained involved with this right up until the time that he died. Thankfully, there was another person in government who came along to carry on his legacy and pick up the torch.
My name is Kirsten Gillibrand. I'm a senator from New York, and I sit on the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. On the Armed Services Committee, over the last decade, we've had very minimal reporting on UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. And I was talking to some staff, and they said, well, if you are interested in this topic, you should really talk to Harry Reid. So I called him and I said, Harry, I'm really interested in this issue of UAPs. Can you give me some advice on it? And he said, well, it's really important and you should definitely work on it. The more I sort of pushed on this issue, the more I realized that our armed forces were able to capture video footage of unidentified aerial phenomena. But over time have decided it's best to say nothing if you see something that you can't identify, because you may well be seen as someone who is crazy and that it will harm your career. We just need to know the facts. And that is certainly our responsibility as members of Congress to demand those facts.
We spend a lot of time, a lot of resources ensuring that our aircraft operate safely, and to think that we would ignore a potential safety issue because of a little skepticism around a three-letter acronym, it just doesn't make sense. I thought that we had to express this in the public light and make it okay to talk about, not just for people, right, but for elected officials.
The pilots know what they are seeing. They're not crazy. They are seeing something which is there, and there are documents, photographs, images that prove that there was something we did not understand.
As a number of these pilots came forward, interest in Washington seemed to increase in this topic. And those pilots actually briefed members of Congress about what they had seen.
I did have the opportunity to go to the Pentagon personally to tell my story in a classified environment. Other pilots went there to discuss this as well.
I'm Alex Dietrich. I'm a retired naval officer. I served 20 years in the U.S. Navy.
My name is David Fravor. I'm a retired Navy commander, Super Hornet pilot, where I flew for 18 years for the United States Navy.
Dave Fravor and I were asked by the Pentagon if we would agree to go into closed session. We spoke to some individuals in Congress, giving us a chance to talk about the incident. We were flying a training exercise in Southern California off the coast. Commander David Fravor in the lead aircraft, he was the commanding officer of the squadron.
We look down and we see a long cylindrical white object with rounded ends, roughly 40 feet long, that looked like a giant tic-tac.
When you have a face-to-face meeting with these pilots, when they describe in detail the incidents and the encounters, and you feel the emotion, it becomes virtually impossible to deny that this is something serious and something real.
One of the meetings with the highest group of officials was supposed to be 30 minutes. It was an hour and a half. They literally did not want to leave. And a couple of them were enthralled, like could not stop asking questions.
How concerned should we be about the briefing that you received on UFOs? Is that a concern for pilots?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into any of the contents of the briefing. It was a classified briefing. The military and others are taking this issue seriously, which I think in previous generations may not have been the case.
Some of my colleagues are very interested in this topic and some kind of, giggle. But I don't think we can allow the stigma to keep us from having an answer to a very fundamental question.
Clearly something's going on. The American public wants to know, and frankly, we deserve to know.
Congress wanted to get to the bottom of this, get everything on the table that was known about it. Ultimately, Congress did something unprecedented.
For many years, government investigations into these close encounters were shrouded in secrecy. Now the curtain may be lifted.
They asked the intelligence community to provide them with a report about what they know about UFOs.
In June, the Pentagon will issue a report to Congress. The release next month of a highly anticipated military report.
For this report from the Director of National Intelligence, we didn't know how responsive the services would be, the Air Force in particular. We were very eager to see what they would come up with.
The U.S. intelligence community has finally released its highly anticipated UFO report.
The Pentagon is taking it seriously, saying it's possible this is a national security issue and a danger to flight.
In this report, it states specifically that there were 144 incidents that this report reviewed.
Now, the study released on Friday found only one of those can be explained, just one.
There were 18 incidents that showed unusual air characteristics. Start, stop, hovering, incredible speed, things that they couldn't explain.
The report established that UFOs are a real physical phenomenon. It also stated that they were not American technology, and there was no evidence that they were either Russian or Chinese.
So we know that. What we don't know is what caused this phenomena.
With the coming out of this report, it's opened up a door because the report, in effect, is inconclusive.
They came back with a report that was pretty lame, I thought. I said I could have written it when I was in the 5th grade. Very short, nothing.
It was very clear to most people that the Air Force was conspicuously absent for that reporting. And I think some of that goes back to when the Air Force was tasked originally in Project Blue Book to look at this topic of UFOs.
Their civilian astronomer, Dr. Alan Hynek, became increasingly dissatisfied as a scientist because they weren't approaching it in a scientific way.
And we've always honored accredited media when they want to investigate a given specific sighting. There's nothing to hide. There's nothing to hide at all.
So this just continues the fine, long tradition of the Air Force neglecting the UFO problem.
The Air Force, of course, has the most sensors, the most capability, and the responsibility for monitoring air and space. That's the primary source you would turn to for information, and they were not forthcoming.
What I fear is that government will feel they were asked to do a report. They did a minimally acceptable report, and now they can go back and forget about it. I fear that.
When I joined the Intelligence Committee, I began to see that we weren't actually getting the reporting that I thought Congress would have been getting on UAPs. That gave me very serious concern that we're not given the information we need to do our jobs.
It's like trying to put a puzzle together when the pieces are in different rooms all over different buildings.
Dr. Hynek told me very wisely that there is no such thing as a US government. There are a number of agencies with their own focus, their own technologies, and their own budgets. So it's very difficult to get those agencies to converge on a new phenomenon that doesn't seem to belong to anyone.
Government agencies definitely need to play a role in gathering data about UFOs, but if they don't organize this data and centralize it, then a lot of it could be lost. We know of at least one case where the material was passed around from agency to agency, and that was the Aguadilla case.
Aguadilla is an incident where the local airport detected a UFO. They notified the U.S. Customs Enforcement aircraft with a sophisticated infrared camera system. They were able to observe it and film it for 5 minutes or so. It's a curious little craft that doesn't appear to have rotors. It's unclear how it manages to fly without wings. When people say, how come there are no pictures? Well, here's quite an extensive video officially taken by the U.S. government of yet another UAP.
The Aguadilla video was shuffled around in Homeland Security, and apparently they sent a copy of the video to the Air Force and said, could you guys tell us what this is? And the Air Force replied back, why don't you contact a civilian UFO group? And so that's how we got access to the video.
This is the object that's being tracked by the Homeland Security aircraft. You have latitude, longitude, coordinates, and you have all the information, and pause right there.
Currently, I'm an executive board member with the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. This organization consists of about 160 people. Almost all of them have backgrounds in science. We provide a location where scientists can actually come and research the subject without the stigma that's often associated with it. We broke the video down into individual frames and looked at it frame by frame. And the first time I saw the video, I'm watching it and you see this little dot moving along. And then to me, you see the object go into the water. And I can hardly see a splash. I mean, how did it do that? But the really exciting part was it comes out of the water and then you see two objects.
Right there, now there's two objects. The pilot, you'll see, he's magnified because he's like, what in the heck is going on?
When I looked at it frame by frame, to me, it was crazy. It was clear to me that there was not another object that came out of the water. I thought this object had simply split in half and became two objects. That's what really made that video so anomalous. But I have no explanation for it. That's just what the data showed.
The Aguadilla video could have easily fallen through the cracks. There are probably other videos that just sit in some agency that we don't even know about.
We had this video and data at the Pentagon. We actually had this. But there's a lot more. There's a lot more videos there. It's not up to me to release or talk about, but I can tell you that I've personally had access to them along with my colleagues. There's some that are extremely compelling.
We need to have a place where all this information can be brought together. That is what a responsible, thoughtful approach towards something you do not know what it is would be. And so that's what I put into the defense bill, and that is what is going to be in place moving forward.
The headlines are screaming about legislation from New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. A bipartisan amendment proposed in the National Defense Authorization Act would create a permanent office.
Permanent government office tasked with investigating unidentified aerial phenomena.
These are serious issues of national security and technology that we should know about.
In December of 2021, Congress enacted the Gillibrand Amendment, which created a new office to study the UAP phenomenon.
What I would expect it to be is some of the brightest minds in the whole country focused on this specific review. Mathematicians and scientists and astrophysicists and people who understand how to look at this phenomenon and analyze it.
The people interested in this have been calling for this for so long, and that it's finally happening is just amazing. And this is only the beginning. The legislation that was proposed by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand was important in so many ways, but one thing that stood out was she wanted the office to research materials that are allegedly connected to crashed UFOs.
We should never be afraid of what we don't know. I know nothing about crashed materials. I don't even know if they exist. If there are any, of course they should be studied. And if we don't know what it is, it's not an appropriate response to say, well, then let's not look at it.
I'm Gary Nolan. I'm a professor of pathology at Stanford. My background is in genetics, microbiology, virology, and cancer biology. When some scientist friend heard that I was working on UFOs, he said, well, you're going to ruin your career. It got me mad. It's just data. I'm not coming to any conclusions. People have been seeing these things for so long, and somehow we seem to feel like we need government to tell us that it's okay to believe in it. I don't agree with that kind of approach to life. I don't need anybody to tell me what it is that I know is real.
Gary's a Nobel nominee and a Stanford researcher, and he's just now coming out of the shadows. He's dealing with something here with the UAP phenomenon as just something outside of our current understanding. But that doesn't mean we should shy away from it. It just means we should understand it.
I've got some of them with me.
In your opinion, does the U.S. government have crashed materials in their possession?
Yes.
What's really important about physical materials is that they could possibly reveal that these were not from Earth. Gary works with Jacques Vallée on these studies. Jacques, he's a computer scientist and astronomer. He also has been studying UFOs, of course, and has been one of the most original thinkers in that field.
Well, I brought some of the other materials here that we've been looking at. I mean, there was 30 pounds of this dropped on the ground in a molten state.
There are a number of cases where people saw an object coming from the sky and crashing in a field, and they've recovered something. When I spoke to physicists, they said, well, you know, Jacques, you know, it's fascinating, but you haven't given me something I can take to my lab, something I can put under a microscope. But that's started to happen in the last few years.
This is a magnesium isotope ratios for Ubatuba.
I wonder why people always expect it to be very complex, you know, metamaterials.
One of the cases that Jacques and Gary studied involved a UFO event that occurred in 1957. Jacques had collected samples and he brought them into the lab and worked with Gary on the case.
The Ubatuba event was the fisherman. He sees a glowing object over the ocean that suddenly exploded and just shattered these magnesium chunks, bright silvery metal, all over the ground and in the water. The fisherman went back and collected this stuff.
Decades later, Gary was able to study it in his lab. He found that for the magnesium sample, the way it was held together was something that had been manipulated.
It's pretty clear that they were part of some industrial process that had engineered them to be different. That is interesting. Maybe it was being used for propulsion. Maybe it was used for energy generation. It's a physics we just don't understand. But who couldn't be excited about potentially understanding it? Because imagine what we could do with it. If you could so easily move from one place to another, as in the videos that have been seen, the energy that is necessary to do that, who needs coal-fired power plants anymore? So that, to me, is one of the most important parts about thinking about the phenomenon. If you take the data off the table and you don't allow it to be part of the solution could be staring you in the face, but you just threw it in the garbage. That's not how a scientist approaches science.
Fear grows in darkness. It's essential that you have light and transparency. There's nothing to me that is frightening or worrisome about research and study and analysis. That is what scientists and academics are extremely good at. It is what they are there to do. So why not use our best and brightest to get a clear handle on what's known and what's unknown?
Now, the UFO topic has been authenticated as real by the government, so that has drawn people in. There's just a much wider arena of people that are involved now.
When the government came forward in the form of the report from the Director of National Intelligence and talks about objects they cannot identify, that's very significant. If the government doesn't really know what they are, then it's the duty of the scientific community to come to the help of the government in figuring it out. So a month after Pentagon report, I established the Galileo project in July 2021.
A team of international scientists is embarking on a new research project that just a few years ago would have been dismissed as very fringe.
What Professor Avi Loeb has managed to do is create this body of scientists who are willing to say, to hell with social stigma. We're going to have the courage as a scientific community to look at this topic from a scientific perspective. That is in itself revolutionary.
At Harvard, astrophysics professor Avi Loeb is hoping to collect scientific data on the kinds of mysterious objects that have been spotted by fighter pilots.
The Galileo project would look at unidentified objects near Earth and try to identify the nature of interstellar objects that enter the solar system from outside, whose nature is unclear. We will keep the data open, not classified.
What Professor Avi Loeb has managed to do is create this consortium of like-minded scientists. And when I say like-minded scientists, I don't mean believers, okay? I mean scientists, all who agree that this topic is worthy of study.
I look at problems differently because fundamentally I'm a farm boy. I used to drive the tractor to the hills of the village and read philosophy books because I was mostly interested about the fundamental questions. How did everything start? Is there life elsewhere? If we see an object in the sky, we should not assume that it's natural or human-made, but rather get more evidence on it if it doesn't look familiar. So this is the roof of the Harvard College Observatory. It's an institution that existed for more than 170 years. This is where the telescope system will be.
Over there?
Yeah, what we will have is a dome-shaped array of infrared cameras that look at the entire sky at all times. We will monitor the sky and have an artificial intelligence software that analyzes what we see and tries to identify whether it's a bird, a drone, an atmospheric phenomena, or something else. We allow for the possibility of an extraterrestrial technological origin, which makes us different from the rest of the scientific community that does not even allow for that possible interpretation.
The Galileo project is an extraordinary step that Dr. Loeb has taken because you have the credibility of a major scientific institution behind it. And it's giving people permission to talk about it. And this is a turning point.
On November 10th, 2021, there was the Ignatius Forum that took place in the Washington National Cathedral. It was attended by the head of NASA, Bill Nelson, the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, Jeff Bezos, and myself. My point is simple. Let's look at the sky and check if there's any equipment that were sent by other civilizations. And that's the goal of the Galileo project. The Ignatius Forum was a discussion about the theological implications of discovering a smarter kid on our cosmic block. It was fascinating for me to sit next to Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence, when she made a statement that some of the objects might be from an extraterrestrial origin.
The main issues that Congress and others have been concerned about are basically safety of flight concerns and counterintelligence issues. But of course, there's always the question of, is there something else that we simply do not understand that might come extraterrestrially?
To me, that was very revealing, because it now appears that government is willing to discuss that possibility of an extraterrestrial origin.
Avril Haines, who is the Director of National Intelligence, saying that it was possible that the strange encounters could be extraterrestrial life.
She said they may be coming extraterrestrially. She opened up that door to that possibility. It's a sign of how things have changed.
Imagine one of these objects happened to be from another civilization. That would change the future of humanity.
People want to know, is this otherworldly? Is it from our solar system? My hope is that the UFO community, along with government officials, will work together in a way that will answer some of these questions.
I'm just about to talk to Representative Andre Carson, who is going to be holding open hearings on UAP. It's been more than half a century since hearings in Congress, so it's like major news that we're having open hearings. There's an email that just came in, conference line in 10 minutes. Hello, Mr. Carson. Thank you so much for taking this call with me.
What an honor, thank you.
I mean, I'd love to know, what you really hope to accomplish from having the hearing next week.
UAPs present a very real national security risk, and this is an area of high public interest. Any undue secrecy can serve as an obstacle to solving the mystery, or it really could prevent us from finding solutions to potential vulnerabilities.
I think for far too long, people have said, oh, the public isn't ready to know about these things, but I think that the public is ready, now more than ever.
The House Oversight Committee will host its first public hearing on this issue since 1969.
Representatives from the Pentagon will be asked questions by lawmakers about what the U.S. government knows about all those strange lights in the sky.
These things very well may be real, and it's about time we heard more about what our government knows about them.
This is really an historic moment. It's a milestone that we are having an open congressional hearing about UFOs.
I wasn't asked to be here, but I felt personally I wanted to have the opportunity to come down here and try to take this thing full circle, frankly. The Navy trained me as a safety officer, and at the end of the day, we have objects that are nearly hitting these aircraft, and it is a safety issue, and it's a tactical issue, and it's a strategic issue.
The subcommittee will come to order. The last time Congress had a hearing on UAPs was half a century ago. I hope that it does not take 50 more years for Congress to hold another, because transparency is desperately needed.
The members of Congress represent the people of the United States. The people want information. Congress wants more transparency from the Pentagon on this topic.
Undersecretary Moultrie, Mr. Bray.
The two witnesses that are being called are high-level officials. Ronald Moultrie is the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, and Scott Bray is Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence. Both of them obviously know a great deal about the Pentagon's research into UFOs.
There have been no collisions between any U.S. assets and one of these UAPs, correct?
We have not had a collision. We've had at least 11 near misses.
Do we have any sensors underwater to detect submerged UAPs?
So I think that would be more appropriately addressed in closed session, sir.
Okay. Can you say with 100% certainty that they are physical objects?
I can say with certainty that a number of these are physical objects.
It's also been reported that there have been UAP observed flying over sensitive military facilities. One such incident allegedly occurred at Malmstrom Air Force Base, in which 10 of our nuclear ICBMs were rendered inoperable. I'm not commenting on the accuracy of this. I'm simply asking you whether you're aware of it.
I have heard stories. I have not seen the official data on that.
Well, I would say, it's a pretty high-profile incident. You're the guys investigating it. I mean, who else is doing it?
Overall, it's a huge step that the hearings even happened, but it was frustrating because they just didn't say that much.
The Pentagon says today's hearings, while it may not find new answers, will help with how these reports are handled.
This could be the first of several hearings, with some lawmakers saying next they would like to hear directly from some of the pilots who have encountered those objects firsthand.
Overall reaction to the hearings, I thought it will be a cover-up at some level, and I feel like that's what it was.
How you doing, Ryan Graves?
Yeah, right. He was one of the pilots.
Oh, good gosh. God bless you.
How are you?
How you doing? Well, so you got a pilot right here, and he should have been the one talking in there, okay? He should have been the one talking, explaining what the heck was going on. Congress needs to give those pilots some sort of whistleblower's protection and some guarantee that it will not be a mark on their record, and we need to bring them in. You talk.
Well, I just really appreciate that everyone took the time out here in order to pay attention to this issue. From my perspective, getting energy on this is simply just going to save lives at the end of the day for our Navy operators. This is something that the American populace is very interested in, and I think that they deserve to know what's going on.
When our own military fighter pilots, the best in the world, they're up there and they're saying, what in the world is this? We should be concerned.
Congress is doing exactly the right thing. If their constituents are demanding answers, then Congress needs to demand answers.
That's what the constitutional framework of our democracy is all about. It's about oversight and accountability, and each branch of government having a responsibility.
Now that the government has acknowledged that UFOs are real, they're physical, they're a national security concern, it raises a lot of questions. The main one being, what are these things? Where are they from? Why are they here?
The truth about UFOs is easy to summarize. The UFO phenomenon is real and maybe the greatest scientific problem of all time.
What do you think these things are?
Let's try to break it down one by one in terms of the technology that we see. We now know that these objects go between Mach 5 and Mach 20, 20 times the speed of sound. They can fly in the air, and they can go even underwater. What could be behind that? Why should they go underwater?
Surprisingly enough, we've explored more of the moon than we've explored of our ocean floors on this planet. So our ocean floors are just as much of a mystery to us as are some of the moons orbiting some of the planets in our solar system.
People ask a lot, well, what do you think they are? When I started out, I was probably pretty convinced of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, that they were just visitors from another planet. But I've come to learn since that the phenomenon is way more complicated.
It was traveling at fantastic speed.
It was a series of about 6 lights in the shape of a cross.
It seemed to be rotating, and it was hovering.
There was a rim of light in the shape of a triangle.
3 of us up here saw it. The length is unbelievable.
They're so diverse, I just don't think it's as simple. Disc-shaped ship that has traveled here from some planet far away.
If we succeed, and if we find that indeed there is an alien intelligence of some kind in our atmosphere, it is going to be something that changes our worldview, changes our understanding of our place in the universe.
The way I see science is as a service to society. The knowledge we obtain from studying the universe is relevant for everyone and benefits everyone.
Do you think we will find evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence in your lifetime?
I think we already have. I don't need to think in the future.
Why is there so much debate? Why all this controversy? Because what's at stake is nothing less than our role in the universe.
It roots back to watching that space race as a kid growing up.
300 feet down, 3.5.
Overall, the world benefited from having that sense of wonder and that commitment to move human knowledge forward. That all applied to the unidentified aerial phenomena question would spur innovation, tremendous thinking, production of knowledge, and that's why it shouldn't be locked in a secure vault someplace.
It's exciting to see there's a lot more attention being given on the subject of UAPs. I hope that things don't go back, and then 70 years from now, we're still wondering what the UAP might be.
The truth about UFOs. Man, that's the one question I was gonna say you should ask me. The truth is that no one knows what they are. But we have the ability to figure it out if we want to.